Chapter 385. Yunyang felt that his luck had been pretty good these few days. Not only had he found his boss flesh and blood, but he had also gained so many great cultivation resources. It would be a good choice to use some of these things on Bao, to build his foundation. However, Yunyang's good mood did not last for more than half a quarter of an hour before it was all gone. Shui Wuin's message had arrived. "I've found out about the news that boss wants to know." When Yunyang saw the message, he was actually stunned. "What news did I want to know? Why don't I have any impression of it?" Finding Shui Wuin, he asked, "What is it?" Shui Wuin was taken aback as well. "The news about the Empire of Zio's assassin that you mentioned earlier? Didn't you ask me to find out about it?" Yunyang came to a sudden realization and said with a chuckle, "Yes, yes, yes." "What's the exact situation?" Shui Wuin said in a relaxed manner, "This has nothing to do with us. It's just that it's caused quite a stir." Yunyang asked with interest, "Just tell me the details. Why are you keeping me guessing?" Not only was this assassin captured by the Empire of Zio's experts, he was severely injured and on the verge of death. The Empire of Zio wanted to punish him openly to warn the world and serve as a warning to others, but for some reason, an important figure has interfered, and now we're in an extremely awkward situation. Yunyang's interest was piqued as he asked, "How awkward?" Shui Wuin said, "It said that this assassin's injuries are too severe. Even with the help of treasured resources, he can only barely hang on to his life, maintaining a single breath of air. Yet, this important figure has spoken out at this critical juncture and is unrelenting." Yunyang mused, what kind of important figure can have such a deterrent force? To be able to deter a great empire from acting recklessly? Shui Wuin spat out 3 words mysteriously, "Jun Moyan." Yunyang was stunned when he heard the name. Suddenly, a sense of foreboding welled up within him. He stood up abruptly, his expression turning frightening. Who are you talking about?" "Jun Moyan. The unrivaled swordsman in the world." Shui Wuin was stunned as well, shocked by Yunyang's expression. "Boss, what's wrong? Why is your face so ugly all of a sudden?" Yunyang could only feel his heart pounding in his chest, almost leaping out of his throat. What is the name of this assassin? What did he look like? Why did Jun Moyan interfere? Do you have any specific information? I really don't know any more specific information. The Empire of Zio has sealed off all information related to this person. It's already a great deal of effort on our side to be able to obtain this information. More information will require more effort. Boss, you didn't ask me to pay too much attention to this matter previously, so the effort I've put in is naturally weaker. Shui Wuin frowned. He could sense that something was wrong. Yunyang's expression and reaction were too unusual. In Shui Wuin's knowledge, Yunyang had sufficient composure and shrewdness. He had always been the kind of person who would remain calm even if a mountain collapsed in front of him. When had he ever been in such a state of panic? But now, not only did his expression change, even his eyes were filled with unprecedented panic, as if something extremely terrifying and unexpected had happened. Could this assassin be related to Lord Supreme Cloud? Or perhaps, he was related to the 9 Supreme's lords? I don't know about other things, but you should know the assassin's approximate age, right? Yunyang asked anxiously. I really don't know about this. It's my oversight. Yunyang closed his eyes. Of course, he knew that it was not Shui Wuin's oversight. It was his previous order that had caused Shui Wuin to be careless and caused the relevant information to go out of control. If he did not even know the assassin's age, then there would not be any other relevant information. In spite of this, the ominous feeling that lingered in Yunyang's heart grew stronger and more tangible. Why did Jun Moyan suddenly interfere? Why did this assassin only target the 4 empires' higher-ups but not Yutong's people? Yunyang touched the medallion of gratitude in his embrace and thought of old Dugu. The lonely old man. Seventh brother's father. Another relative related to the 9 Supremes who was still alive. The more Yunyang thought about it, the more flustered he became, his face draining of color. He had been trying to find out about this old man but he had never heard anything. Never would he have thought that the slightest bit of information that might be related to him would turn out to be a nightmare. The assassin was severely injured and on the brink of death, hanging on to his last breath with the help of the heaven and earth's precious resources. He could pass away at any time. If the assassin was old Dugu, if the old man were to perish, would it not mean that another relative had passed away in front of his eyes? Yunyang was unwilling to accept such an outcome. He was even more unwilling to experience such a parting again. He stood up abruptly and said, "Wuyin, you will take over everything here in Tiantang City. Help me stabilize it no matter what. I have urgent matters to attend to, I have to go out immediately." Shui Wuyin's premonition had become reality, scaring himself to death at once. "Sir. Don't act recklessly." Shui Wuyin's expression changed. The empire of Zio is thousands of miles away, it's an unfamiliar place with countless experts and it's the capital of an enemy nation. Not only will it be difficult for you to accomplish anything by going there alone, you'll also be in grave danger. Yunyang waved his hand coldly, his face ashen. "I've made up my mind. Say no more." Before his words echoed in the air, Yunyang had already turned to leave. "Brother Lei, something unexpected has happened. I can only apologize to Brother Lei first." Yunyang came to Lei Dongtian's room with quick steps. If he were to leave and Lei Dongtian were to stay here, it would be terrible if something unexpected happened. Whether it was being killed or having some of his secrets discovered, Yunyang was unwilling to do so. It was better to get rid of this fellow as soon as possible. "What is it?" Lei Dongtian was shocked. Judging others with his own eyes, he instinctively thought that Yunyang was going to hand him over to the Four Seasons Tower. His eyes could not help showing unprecedented panic and fear. "I have urgent matters to attend to personally. I have to leave Tiantang City immediately. It's destined that I won't be able to send you off when you leave," Yunyang said apologetically. "Oh, is that so?" "It's nothing, nothing at all." Lei Dongtian was relieved at once. "Just do what you need to do. We are brothers, we have plenty of time. Thank you for your understanding, Brother Lei. It's an emergency." Yunyang took a deep breath and said, "This young brother has to go." His eyes were filled with endless rage and urgency. "What's going on? You were still as calm as a mountain when you were threatened by the Four Seasons Tower. Why did you lose your composure this time?" Lei Dongtian asked curiously. "Brother Lei, you may not know this." Yunyang sighed and said, "The Four Seasons Tower is known as the top force in Tianxian continent, but its methods are unscrupulous and despicable. When it encounters an opponent it can't defeat, it will target the opponent's weakness. The unrivaled expert Ling Xiaozui of this world had gone up against it back then because the Four Seasons Tower had threatened him with the safety of his family and friends. Ling Xiaozui had no choice but to retreat. However, there are only a handful of people in this world who can be dealt with by the Four Seasons Tower other than by force. I didn't expect this young brother to enjoy such an honor. They were forced to make a pact with me, agreeing not to lay a hand on me in Tiantang City, but they've detained both of us somewhere else to lure me there." Lei Dongtian was shocked. "There's such a thing? The Four Seasons Tower's methods are so unscrupulous. They don't have the magnanimity of an expert at all?" Yunyang sighed. "I didn't expect the Four Seasons Tower to be so weak. This matter concerns the safety of my 2 family members. I have to rush over, but I'm also worried that after I leave, the target of the pact will not be here. The Four Seasons Tower may very well take the opportunity to attack you. They're even deliberately luring me away. So, Brother Lei, it seems that you really need to leave earlier. If you delay any longer, I'm afraid that everything will go out of control. Lei Dongtian thought about it and felt chills running down his spine. Fear grew rapidly as he said, yes, this must be a ploy to lure me away. He looked at Yun Yang like he was looking at a protective talisman. Brother Yun, are those two important? His meaning was obvious, who could be more important than me? Why don't you stay and protect me? Yun Yang said seriously, it's my eldest senior brother and youngest junior sister. My youngest junior sister is my fiancée. Lei Dongtian was stunned for a moment. Eldest senior brother? Youngest junior sister? Fiancé? Recalling that he had come all the way here for his fiancé, the importance of a fiancé could be imagined. No matter how much Yun Yang valued him, he would rush over overnight no matter what. He could not replace his fiancé. This fiancé could shake my position in Yun Yang's heart. I can't let her stay. And that eldest senior brother, he must die as well. There can only be one person in Yun Yang's heart, no one else. Yun Yang's heart had gradually become Lei Dongtian's obsession. Lei Dongtian did not know about this, let alone Yun Yang. Since sister-in-law is in danger, we naturally have to save her. Brother Yun, you should immediately go and save her. After you leave, I will also immediately depart. I won't let you have any worries and be unable to take care of both ends. Lei Dongtian said decisively, not forgetting to state his stance. Since Yun Yang had left, as he said, the Four Seasons Tower had nothing to worry about. It was already extremely dangerous for him to be here, of course, he had to leave immediately. That would be best. Yun Yang said, my guard is a first-class disguise expert, old Bai. Bai Yixue stood up, young master, I am here. You are responsible for helping young Master Lei in his disguise. It must be perfect, including his skin color, neck, arms, wrists, hair, gaze, eyebrows, and so on. Even the distance between his eyes must be different from before. It must be flawless, without leaving a single flaw. Can you do it? Bai Yixue promised with a serious face, don't worry, young master. I promise to complete the task. Nothing will go wrong. Remember, it must be foolproof. I won't allow any accidents. Yun Yang said seriously, after that, you must make sure that young Master Lei is safe with your own eyes. Otherwise, you don't have to come back. The sudden blackout in the afternoon, I was so worried. At that time, he had already written more than 3,000 words. He was happily writing and typing furiously. His computer had turned black. Unable to stop the inertia, I had actually hit the keyboard 7 to 8 times before I was dumbfounded. My manuscript, then I was told that it could only be recharged after midnight or the next day. That kind of feeling was F***ed up. God knows how it feels to have to rewrite something that has already been written once. Anyway, I had a mental breakdown. Chapter 386. Don't worry, young master. This subordinate will do his best to ensure the completion of the mission. Bai Yixue said passionately, if young Master Lei is injured during this return journey, this subordinate will bring my head to see you. Don't bring your head. Brother Lei's safety is the most important thing. Do you understand? Yun Yang nodded and reminded him solemnly. Lei Dongtian was even more grateful. Of course, he could see that Lao Bai's ability was only at the 6th heaven realm. He usually did not pay much attention to him, but he was already the guard with the highest cultivation base on Yun Yang's side. This guard's cultivation base was nothing to him, but it was definitely not low. Even in his family, he could be ranked in the middle. Such an expert would be at the pinnacle of the Tianxian continent, even higher than Venerable Lord Saber, one of the Four Seasons Tower's 5 venerable lords. He could be said to be Yun Yang's life-saving trump card. Yun Yang's journey would be dangerous, but for his sake, he had sent him to escort him without hesitation. This brotherly bond was simply moving. How could he not be moved? "Brother, take care." Lei Dongtian turned around, feeling touched. He saw Yun Yang looking at him with a sincere gaze. "Brother Lei, please take care." Lei Dongtian nodded heavily, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm leaving." Yun Yang turned to leave. Behind him, Lei Dongtian kept waving his hands, looking melancholic. He understood very well that if it was not because of him, how could Yun Yang's eldest senior brother and fiancée, little junior sister, be captured by the Four Seasons Tower? That was something that would never have happened. After all, he had implicated Yun Yang and put his family and friends in danger. However, this was still fate, the fate between him and Yun Yang. Yun Yang was a man destined to be his cultivation vessel. He had sacrificed for him and he was touched, but this was a fate bestowed by the heavens. If I did not take what the heavens gave me, I would be going against the heavens. The heavens were on my side. I am indeed the heavens' favored one, protected by the heavens, never to be covered in dust. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei, who were standing at the side, tried their best to cover their faces, using all their cultivation base to stop themselves from laughing out loud. Eldest senior brother? Little junior sister? What eldest senior brother and junior sister? Our young master doesn't even have a sect. However, this lie was really easy to tell, and it was full of emotion, which made people believe it without a doubt. Didn't they see that Lei Dongtian was so touched that he was about to open his heart and pour out his heart? Fang Mafei felt that the longer he followed Yun Yang, the more his composure deteriorated. Not only was the mask he had cultivated in the concourse of the underworld broken, even the last bit of composure was gone. He really did not know how to describe such an atmosphere. A gust of wind blew. The sky in Tiantang City that had been gloomy during this period of time suddenly became stormy. The sound of the wind grew louder, and the flags in the city fluttered in the wind. In the sky, the wind swept the white clouds, and the white clouds danced in the wind as they quickly went far away. His Majesty, who had been paying attention to the changes in the weather, walked out of the royal study hastily. Looking up, there was only one thought in his mind: that should be Supreme Wind's movement. Is he going to fetch my grandson? That's for sure. Let's hope this guy can move faster, the faster the better. His Majesty's heart was filled with anticipation. However, Qiu Jianhan, who was sitting in the marshal's residence, did not think so. Supreme Wind had said before that he would only come to listen to his news after 2 to 3 days. He would only fetch the child after hearing his news. This process would not change, he would definitely leave. This meant that Supreme Wind's departure was definitely not to fetch the child, but because he had other matters to attend to. It was not time yet. Looking at how he had created such a huge commotion, not even hesitating to expose Supreme Wind's cultivation method and expose his tracks to summon the wind and clouds to leave. He was definitely going to do something big, and his destination should be somewhere far away. However, Supreme Wind might not be able to return within the scheduled 2 to 3 days. Even how long it would take for him to return was something that could not be predicted. What the F***ck are you doing at this critical juncture? Don't you know that it's urgent here? Old Marshal Qiu leaped onto the roof and scolded without a care for his demeanor. You bastard, what are you doing? You've left such a huge mess to this old man and now you're leaving. How am I going to explain this to him? Do you know that the other side can't wait any longer? They're not the ruthless characters who can wait. Lives are at stake. The old man was really anxious now. He was sweating profusely, drenching his heavy robe. If you don't return by the appointed time, how am I going to explain to the impatient emperor? This time, he was really going to lose his life. It was just a piece of news before and this old man had almost lost half of his soul. Now that you've left without returning, Won't this old man be tortured to death by his majesty? Aren't you Supreme Earth's brother? Why can't you empathize with the urgency of a father who's anxious to see his son? What kind of important matter can't be dealt with after you've dealt with this father? Why are you in such a hurry? However, there was only the sound of the wind in the sky. How could Supreme Wind, who was burning with impatience, hear the old marshal's cries? His only thought now was to find another father who was willing to risk his life for his son. Yunyang was unwilling to wait any longer, even if it was only a breath's worth of time. He could not wait any longer. The other side's life was at stake. He did not know if he could make it in time if he went over now. Yunyang had been traveling at lightning speed. When he reappeared again, it was already noon. In front of him was a huge river. This place was 3,700 miles away from Tiantang City. The river in front of him was vast, at least hundreds of miles wide. The Lunar River. It was said that this river was formed by the soul of the moon. Wherever the moonlight reached, this river would flow to. As long as the moon was still shining in the sky, this river would exist forever. It's been a long time since I've seen the Lunar River. As long as I follow the river, the empire of Zio will be on the other side. Yunyang stood by the Lunar River, watching the river flow slowly as it flowed down 1,000 miles. He could not help feeling lost for a moment. How many times had the 9 brothers reunited by the river? How many times had they packed their luggage for the return trip here after the war? He could still remember the time when the eldest had stood on the rock he was standing on and said, "Legend has it that Tianxian continent doesn't only have the Lunar River, there's also the Solar River, the Stellar Sea, and the Lake of Wind and Cloud. It's a pity that all we can see now is the Lunar River. If the world is at peace in the future, I'll bring the brothers to see these legendary places." The brothers all cheered loudly and made an agreement that they would definitely go when the time came. Yunyang could vaguely remember that when the eldest Supreme Earth had said this, not only had his gaze been strange, his voice seemed different from usual as well. He did not know why he had such a strange feeling back then, but now he knew and understood. It was because the eldest Supreme Earth was the eldest prince. When the world was unified and Yutong's new emperor ascended the throne, if the eldest was still around, how would he feel? It was supposed to be the eldest's position, but he could only watch from the side. Therefore, he thought that instead of watching from the side and feeling uncomfortable, it would be better to bring the brothers to travel when the world was at peace, to leave this sad place where he had given everything away. Supreme Water had been standing beside Supreme Earth then and had said in a loud voice, "That's right. What's more important than being together with the brothers forever?" Thinking about it now, fourth sister had been consoling the eldest back then. It turned out that both of them had already fallen in love then and had even become husband and wife. Listening to Supreme Water's consolation, the eldest said again, "You're right. There's indeed nothing happier than being together with the brothers. Since we're already by the river, fourth, bring me to play in the water." After that, he pulled Supreme Water's hand and leaped into the bottomless Lunar River amidst his guffaws. The brothers jeered and guffawed on the shore, mocking the eldest for his childish temper. Not only did he want to play, he even put it into action. It was a rare sight indeed. I only found out now. The eldest must have gone to the world of just the two of us with fourth sister then. Thinking of this, Yunyang could not help recalling the time when Supreme Earth had jumped with Supreme Water's struggle that he and the others had not noticed, and the brothers had even grumbled about the two of them being good gay friends for life. He could not help grinning and murmured, "Eldest, you're really something. You knew that the few of us knew nothing, so you treated us like fools and went to have fun openly. Seventh brother even said that good gay friends were good gay friends, why didn't we have a part in it?" Many small details were heartwarming yet heart-wrenching when he thought about it now. He remembered how seventh brother Supreme Blood had grinned so heartlessly back then. Although they knew that face was fake, the brothers still wanted to beat him up as a group. His grin was too despicable. "It's your business if you want to be good gay friends for life, why drag us into it?" However, when Yunyang recalled that despicable grin now, he only felt nostalgic and bitter. "Seventh brother, our father might have been captured," Yunyang said quietly. "You. Do you know? How can I allow such a thing to happen? Xiaojio will never allow any of our family to die, never." As Yunyang finished his words, he flew up and melted into the lunar river in an unusually smooth manner. Yes, he melted into the river. The empire of Zhou and Yutong were naturally very different, especially when it came to natural phenomena like the wind. Chapter 387. The news that Supreme Wind was still alive was no longer a secret. Although Yunyang traveled swiftly with the wind and could reach the empire of Zhou earlier, it was equivalent to exposing his tracks. It was a blatant declaration to the people of the empire of Zhou that Supreme Wind of the Nine Supremes had come to the territory of Zhou. If the enemy were to link this to Old Dugu, Yunyang would not be able to bear any accidents that might happen. Therefore, he would rather be slower in order to ensure that this trip was absolutely safe. At least, he had to be absolutely safe before confirming the situation and whether the target was Old Dugu. There was still Jun Moyan guarding the place anyway. There was still room for negotiation. Yunyang decided to use Supreme Water's holy water charm to hasten his journey. He leaped into the lunar river and cultivated the holy water charm along the way using the power of the river's water. He hastened his journey. However, it was only after Yunyang had jumped into the lunar river that he realized that cultivating the holy water charm to turn into water and turning into wind and cloud were two entirely different things. At the very least, the comfort he was feeling right now was incomparable to turning into wind and cloud. Yunyang, who was immersed in the water, felt like he was placed on a large, soft bed. He could control his deific consciousness and even his body, using the power of the water manifestation to expand them limitlessly. As long as the water could reach, his deific consciousness and thoughts could go there as well. Furthermore, it was a real collision of physical contact. Yunyang had never entered the lunar river before, but due to this fortuitous encounter, he understood one thing. The water of the lunar river was fundamentally different from the water of other places. This was a mystical river that stood out from the rest. The water of this river could be used for drinking and irrigation, but the quality of this river's water was much softer and much colder than the water of other places. The lunar river flowed down from the borderless mountains in the extreme east, spanning 178,000 miles into the borderless sea on the other side. It had never stopped surging. Looking from the surface, the water was unusually murky and could not be used as drinking water. However, as Yunyang immersed himself in the river, he realized that there was not even a speck of impurity or sand in the seemingly murky water. All the rocks, sand, and other things that were a hindrance to the water quality were lying quietly under the water. Even if the water occasionally rippled, it was rare that it did not drift with the current. It was a clear distinction in another sense. Other than that, Yunyang had also noticed something odd. The entire lunar river stretched for 170,000 miles, but there was not a single stalk of seaweed in the water by the shore. This was yet another anomaly, one that went against the laws of nature. At the very least, Yunyang could not understand how such a phenomenon could happen. As they traveled along the waterway, the scene of Yunyang dancing with the fishes in the river did not happen as he had expected. It was not that the Kirin fish was magical, but that there were very few fishes in the lunar river. They were so few that they were almost negligible. Perhaps, this was the main reason why no one had ever been able to fish in the lunar river. In spite of this, the reason Yunyang used the adjective almost negligible to describe the number of fish in the lunar river was because the lunar river was not actually devoid of fish. At the very least, Yunyang had seen a fish now. It was a large fish that was as long as a human, glowing in a golden sheen. It swished its tail slowly in the water, looking extremely dazzling. Yun-yang was initially puzzled as to why no one had seen such an eye-catching fish before. When Yun-yang sent his deific consciousness away from the surface of the water and looked down at the river from above, he realized that he could not pinpoint the actual location of the giant fish even when he focused his deific consciousness. It turned out that the color of the fish was exactly the same as the color of the river when he looked down from above. It was almost impossible to detect its presence from above the water. This fish is not small. I wonder if it tastes good. Yun-yang thought to himself. After all, this fish belonged to the mutated species and was probably very rare. However, less than half a quarter of an hour later, Yun-yang realized that his perception was wrong. There was a large fish that had slid past him just now. It was a really big fish, its nostrils alone were already bigger than his head. Yun-yang was shocked. What kind of fish was this? How could it be so powerful? However, what was even more amazing was to come. The new big fish walked forward in an elegant manner. As it walked, it constantly swallowed the river water. When it came to the fish that were as long as a human, it swallowed them without saying a word. There was no trace of anger in its actions, it was as if it could do whatever it wanted. Yun-yang sucked in a cold breath as he watched. Isn't this a little too savage? To carry out such a cruel act in such an elegant manner. Yun-yang felt that this fish was a cold-blooded animal. They were all fish, why would they be in such a hurry to swallow? After a while, Yun-yang realized something else, or rather, something that overturned his understanding. After seeing the large fish and the elegant and brutal giant fish, Yun-yang discovered a third type of strange fish. This third type had the same luster as the lunar river, but the smaller ones were as long as an arm while the bigger ones were like a giant python. What was strange about these fish was that they walked along the shore. Whether it was the budding aquatic plants or the small fishes and prawns at the bottom of the shore, they would all be swallowed without exception. The existence of this third type of fish was like a natural-born scavenger, specialized in cleaning up the miscellaneous items by the lunar river. It advanced all the way. When it was full, it would walk forward, wagging its tail. When it was hungry, it would walk and eat again. Behind them, there was an endless supply of these fish. They would stop after eating, walk and eat again when they were hungry, repeating the cycle. Yet, no matter how big these fish were, even if they were as big as a boat, they would not be discovered. This was because they were like melted objects in the water. They were the unique existence of the water itself. Delighted, Yun-yang tried to touch the bodies of the third type of fish and was shocked to find that his palms, which had returned to physical form, had passed through their bodies without any physical contact. What was even more unbelievable was that the fish that had been pierced through did not feel anything at all. Yun-yang exclaimed. If he had not turned into the lunar river, he probably would not have realized that there were actually so many mysterious giants in this clear river. The world is indeed vast and full of wonders. Creation is mysterious and miraculous, nothing is less than this. Yun-yang exclaimed again and again in his heart. Since the beginning of time, many people had known that the lunar river was mysterious. However, there was not a single person who did not know where the mysteries of the lunar river lay. No one would have thought that the mysteries of the lunar river were actually laid bare in front of them. It was just that the people of the world had turned a blind eye to it. Until today, when Yun-yang had accidentally discovered it. Yun-yang was not sure that he was the first person to discover this secret, he might not even be the second. After all, there was another person who cultivated the holy water charm and had entered the lunar river before him, his fourth sister, Supreme Water. If his fourth sister knew this secret, then his eldest brother, Supreme Earth, should know it as well. The only regret was that even if he knew the secret, there was no room for him to use it. Just like what Yun-yang had tried before, he could not catch the strange fish even when he had touched it with his own hands. What was the use of knowing this secret? Perhaps this was the main reason why his eldest brother and fourth sister knew of the peculiarity of the lunar river but did not tell their brothers. There are so many secrets hidden in the lunar river alone. Even though it has been presented to the world over the years, the people have turned a blind eye to it. What about the solar river? The stellar sea? The lake of wind and cloud? What will happen? Yun Yang, who had his horizons broadened, could not help but consider the other strange places that were as famous as the lunar river. Since these places could be as famous as the lunar river, there must be many mysteries about them. Yun Yang suddenly had the urge to go and take a look. At this point, he finally understood the other meaning behind Supreme Earth's words back then. Other than his feelings, he did indeed have the desire to see the mysterious places of this world. In the future, I will visit all of these mysterious places, Yun Yang said quietly, with our common wish. As time passed, Yun Yang grew more and more interested in the lunar river. He realized that the water of the lunar river was extremely soft and cold, but there was also a strange quality to it. If it was diverted into another channel, it would become no different from an ordinary water source. There was nothing different about it. The lunar river's water was pure and clean. Once it was diverted, there would not be a single shrimp in it. All living things within the lunar river's boundary seemed to only be able to stay in the lunar river, only belonging to it. No water source other than the lunar river could be tolerated. The water around him suddenly surged slightly. Then, Yun Yang discovered a huge fish, the biggest fish he had ever seen since he was born. The fish was at least 370 to 80 feet long and 200 feet wide. It swam over leisurely. Actually, Yun Yang had encountered gigantic fish before, but even when he met them or even came into direct contact with them, it was as if he did not see them or touch them. The difference between the two was clear as they moved. Therefore, even though Yun Yang was shocked to see the gigantic fish, he did not pay it much attention. However, there was an unexpected turn of events that Yun Yang did not expect this time. Yun Yang was shocked to realize that the water he had turned into had been sucked into the gigantic fish's mouth and stomach. Then, with a swoosh, he was spat out again. It's huge. F***ck. How unlucky. Yun Yang exclaimed and cursed with a dark expression. Yun Yang quickly understood what was going on, but it was precisely because he knew what was going on that he was cursing his bad luck. A certain someone had been swallowed by the gigantic fish from the front and then spat out from the back. In fact, the entire process was unusually smooth. The gigantic fish did not even realize what it had swallowed or spat out. Chapter 388. However, Yun Yang, who was the other party involved, was exceptionally frustrated. Anyone would be frustrated by this, it was understandable. However, no matter how frustrated he was, there was nothing he could do about the fish. After all, Yun Yang had tried repeatedly, but no matter what method he used, he could not really touch the fish. Otherwise, he would have done something else long ago. He could only watch helplessly as the gigantic fish that had swallowed and spat him left. It was at this moment that something happened again. The gigantic fish suddenly stopped and began to wander on the spot, shaking its head and tail as if it was looking for something. His two large eyes were as big as a house, and they were wide open, looking around for something. There was no other reason other than the fact that it seemed to have eaten something amazing just now. Although it had only passed through his stomach once, it had already caused him to suddenly feel refreshed and comfortable. Even his body had grown a little at that moment. It was unbelievable. How could it let go of such a good thing? Therefore, the gigantic fish stopped and did not leave. Finding something good, searching for something good, occupying something good, everything was logical and logical. However, after searching for a while, he did not find anything. The giant fish was disappointed, but an idea came to his mind. How did he get that good thing? Wasn't it just swallowing the river water? He could just do it like a bowl. Thus, he continued searching and swallowing the river water. Gradually, he turned the lunar river into a huge whirlpool. However, the surface of the water was as smooth as a mirror. Of course, Yun-yang would not make the same mistake again. He followed right under the big fellow's fins. No matter how it searched or swallowed, as long as it could not swallow its own fins, he would not be able to enter its stomach. Yun-yang was puzzled as well. This fellow obviously did not notice him just now. After cultivating the holy water charm, I have become a water manifestation, tangible but formless. Even I can't find myself. How did this fellow notice it? Yun-yang had obviously neglected one thing, a very important thing. The treasured resources that Yun Zuyu had fed him had long turned Yun-yang into a human-shaped treasure, like a spiritual medicine. Even when his physical body turned into water, the medicinal effect would not vanish. It would still be excreted through his sweat pores. It was a process of metabolism. And just now, that supergiant fish had taken advantage of that bit of light and tasted the sweetness. That was why it enjoyed the taste so much that it forgot to go home. With the current situation, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to escape. Since I can't escape, then I might as well seize this opportunity to study this fish. Yun-yang channeled the holy water charm subtly to ensure that he remained in the state of flowing water. He swam back and forth on the fish's body, studying it in detail. Although this fish caused a huge commotion, I didn't sense any danger from it. Its lethality is flashy but impractical, not worth mentioning. I wonder if this fish tastes good? It's a pity that the fish in this river can be seen but not touched, let alone caught. What a pity. Yun-yang suddenly had a thought. Right, since this fish is so huge, could it have an inner core? With this thought, Yun-yang had the urge to enter the creature's stomach again to take a look. Do whatever you want. This time, Yun-yang dove into the creature's mouth on his own accord. The creature was sucking in with its mouth wide open, hoping to swallow something good again. However, before the new round of sucking could begin, it suddenly felt a stream of water gushing into its mouth and into its stomach. The big guy immediately opened his mouth, which could almost swallow a city gate, and was instantly stunned. What was going on? What was going on? Leaving aside the creature's confusion, Yun-yang had already entered the fish's stomach successfully. The lunar river fish that could not be touched in its physical form could be touched in its water form. Yun-yang carefully cultivated the holy water charm, searching for it along the way. Under his careful control, he did not have to worry about being spat out by the supergiant fish's instinctive reaction. But in this way, this big guy would be able to bask in more light, and it would only get more and more. The creature still did not understand what was going on, but it knew that something beneficial to it had been swallowed by it and that it would be safe in its stomach for a long time. Out of instinct and fear of its own kind snatching it away, it quickly curbed its movements and charged forward with all its might. It brought Yun-yang along as it sprinted forward. In terms of speed, however, it was more than 10 times faster than Yun-yang's first stage of holy water charm. However, this big guy would never have thought that the little guy in its stomach was up to no good at all. Yun-yang, who was swimming leisurely in the fish's stomach, suddenly felt a flash of light in front of him. Yun-yang, who was swimming leisurely in the fish's stomach, suddenly felt a flash of light in front of him. Naturally, he followed the light and continued to move forward slowly until he came to the light and took a closer look. Even with Yun-yang's composure, he could not help but exclaim in surprise. My goodness! Hanging in front of him was a bunch of gigantic grapes. It should be said that it was like a grape, but it was much bigger than a grape. There were about 40 to 50 grapes in front of him, each of them was round and colorless, crystal clear. Judging by their size, each of them was about the size of a watermelon, exuding an endless amount of spiritual qi that was extremely rich. While the unique spiritual qi in front of him made Yun-yang feel comfortable, it also gave him a strange feeling, I've never seen it before, but it feels very familiar, a strange feeling. It was only when Yun-yang saw the gleam of cold light that he finally understood, a thought emerging in his mind. This is the qi of moonlight. Yun-yang tried to form the water into the shape of a hand, grabbing one with both hands and pulling it down forcefully. With a soft tearing sound, Yun-yang had actually plucked one of them off. The gigantic fish that was strolling forward leisurely did not seem to notice anything amiss. It did not seem to feel any pain at all. Could it not feel any pain? Yun-yang, who had already split a part of his deific consciousness to observe the gigantic fish, was stunned. He was even prepared for the fish to react violently and turn the world upside down, but the fish did not react at all and was still doing what it was supposed to do. Was this not strange? However, what happened next made Yun-yang even more confused and bewildered. This was because Yun-yang had seen with his own eyes that the watermelon grape beads that he had been holding in his hands, materialized from his water manifestation, had shattered without a sound. Then, the aura had dissipated, never to be seen again. Yun-yang's hands were empty. Then, a new watermelon grape grew in the spot where he had plucked one of the grapes off the bunch. Yun-yang was speechless. It couldn't be that strange, could it? I've just entered the lunar river and it's already giving me such a huge surprise. Yun-yang tried more than a dozen times but it was all in vain, a waste of effort. There was a rich spiritual energy right in front of him, but he could not absorb it. It was easy to pluck the watermelon grapes, but they would go back on their own. Yun-yang's repeated attempts were futile, driving him mad. The current situation was like looking at a treasure mountain that was 3 feet in front of him. As long as he could pluck a piece of it, he would not have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of his life. However, when he finally managed to pluck a piece off, it would go back on itself before he could take it away. The moment of possession was not equivalent to possessing it. He had actually experienced the truth of this saying. How **King frustrating. The current situation made Yun-yang feel conflicted. He could clearly feel that this was a strange power, and it definitely had a great use. However, the problem now was that he could not take it away no matter how hard he tried. He could see it, he could even touch it, but he just could not get it in his hands. This was not just a dilemma, it was a frustration. Yun-yang had never seen such a strange fish before, much less such a strange water. There was also such a mystical and mysterious energy. There were many mysterious energies in the legends of the world, each with unique powers. However, the one that Yun-yang had encountered today was not even mentioned in the legends. It was enough to show how mystical it was. The Lunar River, one of the 4 mysterious waters of the Tianxian continent, had finally unveiled a mysterious veil in front of Yun-yang today. However, he did not know if this veil was the innermost layer, the middle layer, or perhaps it was just the outermost layer of the veil. Yun-yang's attempts were futile. Finally, he felt that he was at his wit's end, but he was indignant. The treasure mountain was right in front of him, but he had to return empty-handed? However, just as his thoughts wavered, he was spat out once more. What bad luck! Yun-yang sighed. The first time he was spat out, it was sudden and he could not do anything about it. This time, he had brought it upon himself. However, with the opportunity before him, Yun-yang was indignant. He turned into a stream of water and entered once more. This time, however, Yun-yang changed his host body slightly. Once he entered, he changed his cultivation method immediately, turning from a stream of water to a drop of blood. This was also the magical effect of the holy water charm. As long as the cultivator's cultivation was successful and his skill was sufficient, he could transform any liquid substance in this world. Of course, Yun-yang's current skill was still shallow. He could only transform something like blood, mercury, gold liquid, molten lava, and so on. He was still far from being able to do so. However, once he turned into a drop of blood, he could stay in the giant fish's stomach for a long time. After all, to the giant fish, Yun-yang was already a part of its body and could not be separated easily. Since there was no longer the threat of being spat out, Yun-yang continued to get the bunch of grapes. Chapter 389. Yun-yang was certain at once that this was a treasure, a superb treasure. It was a pity that Yun-yang had worked hard for a whole day, but there was nothing to show for it, not to mention any benefits. It was midnight. Yun-yang stood by the shore helplessly, looking at the lunar river, and could not help but sigh. This is obviously a massive treasure that's right in front of everyone's eyes. The struggle in Yun-yang's heart grew exponentially. The feeling of entering a treasure trove and returning empty-handed was like a weed growing in Yun-yang's heart that could not be erased. So what if it was? There was really nothing he could do. Yun-yang had used all his tricks throughout the day. Water attribute, no. Thunder attribute, no. Blood attribute, fire attribute, no. Wind and cloud attribute, no. Unique cultivation methods were all useless. Yun-yang had even tried to use the purest mystical qi to fuse with the grape's mystical qi, but it still did not work. Yun-yang had tried using brute force to grind it, even biting it with his mouth, using his sword, saber, and even storing it in his spatial ring, but it was all futile. After confirming that he was helpless, Yun-yang had asked the Eclipse Panther to absorb it and Gigi to absorb it. If his pet beast could benefit from it, it would be the next best option, but it still did not work. In the end, Yun-yang had no choice but to use Emmy's ultimate trick. To Yun-yang, Emmy was the nemesis of all kinds of energy in this world. Everything in the past had proven this point. Although it was a bit of a waste for Emmy to absorb it, it was still better for one of them to gain something than to miss it. However, Yun-yang was filled with confidence as he waited for Emmy's good news and the leftover benefits that had leaked out, only to receive an extremely depressing answer. This is a power that doesn't belong to this world. The fishes in front of me aren't of this world either. They can't be absorbed or targeted. Yun-yang was dumbfounded by Emmy's answer. Doesn't belong to this world? This answer explained why Emmy could not absorb it. However, how was this an answer? Doesn't belong to this world, but why am I seeing it here? Is this not this world? When Yun-yang wanted to ask again, he realized that Emmy had stopped talking. He did not know that Emmy was feeling frustrated. Good stuff, really good stuff, but I can only look at it, but I can't eat it. What is this? Were all the things in this world so varied? Could it be a fake? After a whole day of trying, Yun-yang finally decided to give up. If he didn't give up, what else could he do? He had important matters to attend to, and he shouldn't stay here for even a day. Moreover, he had already used all the methods he could, and there was nothing he could do. Even so, Yun-yang's heart was still broken and defeated. After all, ever since Yun-yang had gone through the calamity of the 9 Supremes, his journey had been smooth sailing. Today, however, he had to return in defeat in front of a river and a school of fish. How could he be depressed, conflicted, defeated, and broken down? In the time that followed, he cultivated the holy water incantation as he traveled. However, as it was difficult for him to concentrate, the results of his cultivation were the worst he had ever achieved. After 2 whole days, he had only managed to cultivate to the middle of the 2nd level of the holy water incantation with the help of the lunar river, which was a holy land for water cultivation. Of course, if it had been someone else, the progress would not have been considered slow. Not only was it not slow, it could be said that it was shockingly fast. However, compared to Yun-yang who had so many mystical aids, it was very slow. With Yun-yang's temperament and cultivation base, he should not have been so dispirited after a single setback. It was because he had encountered many of those huge fishes during the next 2 days of travel. One of them was even bigger than the previous one, by a few times. If the previous one was already a super giant fish, then this one was at least a supergiant fish. The core of this super fish was also a bunch of super big grapes, the biggest one among them reaching the size of 3 watermelons. However, Yunyang felt that his holy water incantation cultivation base had improved again, or perhaps it was because he was unwilling to give up. He tried to dive in and absorb it again, but it was still to no avail. As such, Yunyang's frustration grew to a whole new level. He even felt that his depression had risen to a level that no one had ever experienced before. From beginning to end, Yunyang had encountered hundreds of these huge fishes with the energy cores in their stomachs. Yunyang believed that what he had encountered and seen was far from all of them, it was only what he had seen along the way. This stretch of water was only a little more than 10,000 miles while the entire lunar river was 178,000 miles long. Each time he thought about the fishes he had encountered, as long as he had eaten any one of the grape cores in their bodies, his ability would have improved tremendously and his power would have increased tremendously. If he had eaten the core of the biggest fish, even just one of it would have been enough to make him invincible in the world. He had encountered tens of thousands of treasures in total, but not only could he see them, touch them, and even capture them in his hands. Yet, he could not truly keep them for his own use. If it had been anyone else, they would have been frustrated, dispirited, or even broken down. Yunyang felt that he could be considered a genius for being able to cultivate to the second stage of holy water charm under such a state of mind. He felt good about himself, so good that he could not be better. He actually wanted to cry out loud, to express the sorrow of entering a treasure trove and returning empty-handed. Even though the great joys and sorrows of life had come so suddenly, so inexplicably. This is still the lunar river that the world knows of. Other than that, there are the more mysterious solar river, stellar sea, and lake of wind and cloud. I wonder what they look like. One day, I'll find out what's going on and what the other 3 lands of holy water look like. I'll bring my brother's wishes and see them one by one. The last time Yunyang had said this, he had only wanted to look at the scenery. This time, however, Yunyang had made up his mind. The mystery within, I must be clear, I must find out. What a massive treasure. While Yunyang's attempts to obtain the energy of the exotic fishes were futile and frustrating, there was also a good thing: Yunyang was now within the empire of Zio's territory. Indeed, Yunyang had arrived at Zio's territory within these 2 days. There was a reason why he could arrive at his destination so swiftly. With Yunyang's holy water charm cultivation base, his movement speed as a unit of water movement was far slower than that of wind or cloud. However, when Yunyang had tried to obtain the exotic energy from the giant fishes, he would always look for them that were heading towards the empire of Zio. Yunyang, who was residing in the belly of the giant fishes, was also gradually approaching the empire of Zio. Furthermore, the speed of the giant fishes was not only far faster than Yunyang's water movement, it was no slower than Yunyang's full speed in his wind manifestation. I've entered the empire of Zio's territory. In other words, I'm now less than 7,000 miles away from the empire of Zio's capital, Zilong City. Yunyang confirmed the terrain beneath him and calculated, there's still less than 7,000 miles. Honestly, if he had a choice, Yunyang really did not want to come out of the water and step onto land. There were so many giant fishes and so many cores. A great opportunity was right before his eyes. It was because of the holy water charm that he had encountered such mystical energy. It was obviously his opportunity, but why did he not get any of it in the end? Thinking about it, Yunyang felt like he was about to break down again. Forget it. Since the beginning of time, no one has ever discovered the secret of the lunar river, let alone the fact that there are fishes in it. There aren't even any legends related to it. It won't be discovered in these few days. This opportunity is a secret that I've obtained alone. I should focus on what's in front of me. When the trip to Zio is over, I'll think about the follow-up to this matter. Yunyang pondered for a moment and no longer hesitated. He turned into a breeze and advanced in the air. He really did not want to be agitated like this now. It was already too many times for him to go through it again and again. I'll come back in the future anyway. Yunyang traveled leisurely in the air. After about 700 to 800 miles, he suddenly realized that there was a 3-story ship with bulging sails on the surface of the lunar river not far in front of him. It was moving swiftly on the surface of the water as if it was flying. Not only was the ship moving at an unusually fast speed, it was also more than 100 times larger than ordinary ships that traveled on the surface of the water. It was 1,000 feet wide and 3,000 feet long. Just the pitch-black, hundreds of feet long horn at the bow of the ship was like a monster galloping on the surface of the water. It was a pity that Yunyang did not care about the gigantic ship at all. Yunyang had seen too many big fellows in the past 2 days, so he did not feel that the ship was huge at all. Was it huge? It was not even as big as a fish, yet it was called big. More importantly, Yunyang knew this ship and knew its background and history. Putting a certain someone's new horizons aside, this gigantic 3-story ship was rare even in the entire world. It could even be considered the world's largest ship. The reason for this recognition was that this ship originally belonged to the Empire of Yutong. Back then, Yutong's founding emperor had spent 20 years and the entire nation's resources to build 3 gigantic ships of the same type and model. As for the materials used to build these 3 gigantic ships, even the most inconspicuous piece of wood was the star hemlock, which was said to be indestructible for tens of thousands of years. It could be said that even if such a ship were to be left idle for hundreds or thousands of years, it would still be as bright as new, its splendor undiminished. Chapter 390. As long as the 3-headed dragon was captured and swallowed together with the yin-yang snake core that the late emperor already had, he would immediately be able to create a myth-level expert. He could even give birth to an eternal emperor who would live forever. To Yutong's founding ancestor, the lineup he sent out was enough to shake any powerful mystical beast in this world. Even the legendary 3-headed flood dragon, a Tianxian pinnacle mystical beast, could be captured easily. The day he ruled over Tianxian forever was just around the corner. Unfortunately, the reality was that 2 of the 3 ships had sunk less than half a month after setting out to sea. The 3rd ship would have perished if it hadn't been for the fact that it saw the opportunity in time and ran back with all its might. Along the way, it was attacked by powerful sea beasts. Even after the ships docked, the attacks from the sea beasts did not stop. The dock that was docked was destroyed in an instant. It was also that battle that wiped out the Empire of Yutong's elite naval forces in one fell swoop, completely crushing the late emperor's ambition. Judging from Yutong's national power back then, the Empire of Yutong would have conquered the world a long time ago if it had not been for that voyage. Perhaps it was destined that there would never be an eternal emperor in this world. All in all, that voyage had become the dividing line between the Empire of Yutong's prosperity and decline. The ship that had escaped with great difficulty was placed at the Lunar River's dock that flowed through Yutong and had not been used for many years. As the 9 Supremes think tank, Yunyang, who was in charge of the war and had calculated all of his forces, knew that Yutong had such a ship, but he had never seen it before. He had never thought that he would see this supreme fortress ship that symbolized Yutong's most glorious period on the Lunar River, in the Empire of Zio. Yunyang's gaze focused on the ship. All he could see were warriors in black helmets and armor, each of them looking valiant and valiant. However, each of them had a white band tied around their arms. Many of the generals had white bands tied around their foreheads as well. Yunyang was puzzled. What was the purpose of this ship? Who had brought it here? He furrowed his brows and waved his hand. Then, a sudden gust of wind blew past. The ship, which was originally traveling at a high speed with the wind and the current, suddenly encountered a headwind. The surface of the Lunar Soul River also became turbulent. Waves of tens of feet high rose one after another, hitting the Supreme Ship again and again. Even though the Supreme Ship was huge, it still couldn't help but shake in the face of such strong winds and waves. What happened? A general jumped out and asked sternly. However, there was no one who could answer this question. Everyone was shocked by this sudden turn of events, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. Right at this moment, one of the curtains on the three-story ship was suddenly lifted, and a tall figure walked out with large strides. Yun Yang, who was looking down from the sky, could not help but stare blankly at the silhouette on the other side, almost falling from the sky. What's going on? Why was this person here? The person who came out was tall and walked with a majestic gait. Although he was slightly skinny, he naturally had the air of a great general as he stood there. The newcomer wore a purplish-black armor, a phoenix helmet on his head, and a treasured sword hung from his waist. One of his hands seemed to be placed on the sword's hilt casually, but in fact, he was ready to react in time to any unexpected danger. This person was looking into the distance from the top of the three-story ship, a lock of hair that spilled out from the helmet fluttering in the wind. It was Shangguan Lingxiu. Yun Yang's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. Why was she here? He remembered that when the Four Seasons Tower attacked the residence of Yun, he had caught a glimpse of Shangguan Lingxiu leading troops to help. She seemed to be dressed like this then. However, she did not come to greet him then. Instead, she had left directly after making sure that he was safe. Now that she had suddenly appeared here, Yun Yang was extremely puzzled by the turn of events. According to the time, it should be, after making sure that he was safe, she had gone to the port immediately and left in a hurry. That was how she could possibly appear here now. However, what was Shangguan Lingxiu doing here? This was the Shangguan family of generals' biggest enemy, within the territory of the Empire of Zhou. General Wudi's tragedy and vow all those years ago were still ringing in his ears, heart-wrenching. No matter what, the Shangguan family should not have appeared here. Yet, Shangguan Lingxiu had appeared here. Following Yun Yang's inaction, the wind and waves on the river's surface calmed down and the surrounding environment calmed down swiftly. The ship continued to move forward. What happened just now? Shangguan Lingxiu asked calmly. I don't know. The burly general was still watching the surroundings cautiously. There was a sudden, strange wind that caused the river's condition to change, but it's gone now. Shangguan Lingxiu frowned and murmured, strange wind? Could it be? How could it be? It can't be. She looked around but did not notice anything out of the ordinary. With a frown, she returned to the cabin. However, just as she entered her private cabin, she almost cried out in surprise. In front of her, a green silhouette stood quietly, as if he had been there for a long time, waiting for her to return. Lady Shangguan? The green silhouette said faintly, please take a seat. The other party did not budge, but a gust of wind blew as a chair at the corner of the cabin floated soundlessly into the air and floated in front of Shangguan Lingxiu. It landed steadily, not making a single sound throughout the entire process. It's Lord Supreme Wind? Shangguan Lingxiu said in pleasant surprise, I wonder if Lord Supreme Wind has appeared suddenly? Yun Yang was taken aback. You don't doubt the authenticity of my identity? Shangguan Lingxiu smiled sweetly. The daughter of a family of generals can naturally recognize Lord Supreme Wind's accent. While Yun Yang was relieved, he asked seriously, why is the Shangguan family of generals here? What's the matter? Yun Yang was extremely puzzled about the purpose of Shangguan Lingxiu's visit. That was why he had appeared as Supreme Wind to ask her face to face. Shangguan Lingxiu understood the origin of the strange wind at once. Lord Supreme Wind must have passed by this place coincidentally due to some errands and accidentally saw the ship, recognizing its origins. Hence, he had come down to question it. If it was an enemy, he could just overturn it and feed it to the fishes. If there was any secret operation by Yutong's official military, there was no need to hide it from Supreme Wind. Shangguan Lingxiu understood immediately and said, "The incident this time is because of Granduncle Wudi's matter. The Shangguan family is required to come over. This humble girl has come because of this matter." Supreme Wind's voice was much more serious and respectful. "It's related to General Shangguan Wudi?" Shangguan Lingxiu lowered her head. "Yes. Is Lady Lingxiu here to bring the corpses of General Wudi and his wife back to the Shangguan family?" Yunyang sucked in a deep breath. If this was the case, he had to lend a helping hand. "No. But it's related to this as well." Shangguan Lingxiu hesitated for a bit before she explained in detail, "The reason for this operation is because the old mistress at home hasn't been feeling well in recent years. That's why she asked me to come and bring Granduncle Wudi's memorial tablet back. There have been some incidents in the Empire of Zio as well. I was thinking that perhaps I could invite Granduncle and the rest back earlier." At this point, she sighed faintly. "What are the specific incidents?" Yunyang asked, "What has happened in the Empire of Zio?" Shangguan Lingxiu gritted her teeth, a murderous glint in her eyes. "Someone here has suddenly suggested to destroy Granduncle's remains. There are a few people in the Zio royal family who have the same intention. Only the Empire of Zio's emperor himself has objections and doesn't agree with it. After some negotiation, we came over." Shangguan Lingxiu's description of the incidents was vague. Yunyang was confused, but he could still understand the general situation. The Empire of Zio wanted to destroy the Shangguan family of generals' ancestors' remains, and the Emperor of Zio had used this as a bargaining chip to force the Shangguan family of generals to compromise. The so-called negotiation was just an excuse. This was evident from the worry in Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes. Even though she had said it lightly and there was the buffer of negotiation between the two empires, the Shangguan family could not wait any longer. The Shangguan family of generals was at a complete disadvantage in the current situation. They were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered, no matter how much the other party demanded. What was more, if the Empire of Zio really destroyed the ancestors' remains, it would be the family's greatest regret. There would be no way to make up for it. Therefore, Shangguan Lingxiu had set off earlier. When the emperor heard about this, not only had he sent 10,000 troops to assist, he had even allocated the supreme warship to increase Shangguan Lingxiu's speed. "If General Wudi can return, of course, we must welcome him back with the world's most invincible warship." These were His Majesty's exact words. Only then can he be worthy of Shangguan Wudi's hero. A hero in life and a hero in death. Where is Lord Supreme Wind heading to this time? Anticipation flashed in Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes. If they could receive Lord Supreme Wind's assistance this time, it would be an unexpectedly strong aid and they would definitely benefit greatly. "Me?" Yunyang thought about it and said, "I have something to do on this trip, but perhaps we can meet again in Zilong City." Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes shone brightly when she got the confirmation. "Yes, this humble girl will keep my mouth shut. I will never reveal Lord Supreme Wind's whereabouts." Shangguan Lingxiu had never let her name down. She was exceptionally intelligent and had thought of keeping it a secret at once. Supreme Wind leaving the country was a major event. As the only surviving member of the 9 Supremes, his importance was even above that of Yutong's emperor, Yupeza. If the Empire of Zio knew about it, they would definitely think of ways to deal with Supreme Wind. To Zio and the other 3 empires, even if they had to sacrifice their capital, it would be worth it as long as Supreme Wind could be killed. Chapter 391. Yunyang did not stay for long. He left after exchanging a few words and understanding Shangguan Lingxiu's purpose of coming. To Yunyang, there was nothing more important than confirming whether the assassin who had fallen in Zio was old Dugu. Even if the other side was related to the Shangguan family of generals and Shangguan Wudi, compared to a dead man, it was better to take care of the living first. Watching Yunyang leave, Shangguan Lingxiu stood at the side of the ship, biting her plump lips as a strange feeling rose within her. This Lord Supreme Wind doesn't seem to have any contact with me previously, but why does he seem to be very familiar with me? Also, why do I feel that this Lord Supreme Wind is very familiar as well? Who was it that made me feel this sense of familiarity? Shangguan Lingxiu faced the wind, her hair fluttering as a thought rose within her. Although this Lord Supreme Wind has never shown his true face, he should be someone I know. Inexplicably, Shangguan Lingxiu's flustered heart had calmed down considerably regarding this trip to the Empire of Zio. The ship was still moving forward steadily. I'll take a nap first, Shangguan Lingxiu thought quietly. She had been thinking about how to deal with the situation for the past few days, but now, she seemed to have suddenly relaxed. The fatigue that had accumulated previously surged forth at once. She had to rest quickly and recuperate. Yunyang traveled with the speed of the wind and entered the water to cultivate the holy water charm. Naturally, his speed was much faster than the ship. Therefore, Yunyang arrived at Zilong City after just over a day's time. However, once he arrived at Zilong City, his expression changed drastically. He realized that the entire Zilong City had become a zone of spiritual control. In other words, the atmosphere of the entire Zilong City was exactly the same as when the 9 Supremes had been ambushed. Under such circumstances, even Yunyang, whose cultivation base had improved tremendously, had to enter the city in his physical form if he wanted to use the manifestation of the 9 Supremes. Back then, it was only Tianxian Cliff that was targeted at the 9 Supremes. Now, the entire Zilong City was filled with such an atmosphere. Yunyang stood 50 miles away, frowning as he looked at Zilong City, his expression darkening. While Yunyang was feeling anxious, there was also a huge doubt in his mind. The activation of the Empire of Zio's spiritual restraining formation was obviously targeted. Once the formation was activated, no cultivator in the entire Zilong City would be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. In other words, as long as the formation was not withdrawn, all the martial artists within the Purple Dragon City's range would stop at their current level. Unless he fled far away and left Zilong City. However, Yunyang had to enter Zilong City before he could confirm the assassin's identity. Yunyang came to the conclusion that the Zilong City in front of him was a trap. Furthermore, it was a trap specifically targeted at him. An overt plot. An overt plot against him. It was not that Yunyang was worrying for nothing, but the current situation was already set in stone. This was definitely a trap. The spirit restraining formation in front of him covered the entire Zilong City. How big of a deal was this? And who was the one who created this formation? Controlling the entire Zilong City. This was a large-scale city with a population of more than 4 million. What kind of conditions would it take to completely control spirits? Yunyang was now doubting whether the Empire of Zio's treasury could have so many spiritual control resources. Could it afford such a consumption? The news of the capture of the assassin came first, followed by such a setup. In addition, such a setup was targeted at the 9 Supremes. There would never be such a grand setup in the entire continent, other than targeting the 9 Supremes. What was more, it was happening in the Empire's capital. Therefore, Yunyang was certain of one thing: the person they had captured must be old Dugu. Other than that, there was no other choice. No matter what method had been used to find out about the relationship between old Dugu and the 9 Supremes. Therefore, this formation had been set up. Therefore, it had to be a trap. It was definitely a trap. However, Yunyang's problem was that even though he knew that it was a trap for him, he still had to enter it. No matter what the reason was. Whether it was old Dugu who had leaked the news or not, Yunyang had to save the person first. Yunyang had a deep understanding of torture. He firmly believed in one thing: if the torture had reached a certain point, the secret would not have been kept. The human body could not withstand such a punishment. Especially in a situation where one could not die even if they wanted to. Even if it was my father who leaked the news, I won't blame him at all. I'll save the old man and let him enjoy his old age in peace. Yun Yang's gaze was fiery. Because this is my family. Even if I have to sacrifice myself, I'll save my family. I won't have the slightest resentment. Since I've long decided to save him even if I have to sacrifice myself, what's the big deal if he leaked some news? If it wasn't him who leaked it, the Empire of Zio would have to pay a terrible price. I swear. I know it's a little old-fashioned of me to do this, but my brother's family, my brother's father, is my father. Yun Yang sucked in a soft breath. I'll do whatever it takes. The question now was, how was he going to get in? This was the first hurdle. In the past, Yun Yang had various cultivation methods to protect himself, so he could easily sneak in no matter how treacherous the environment was. Now, however, this wishful thinking was fated to fail. No matter which cultivation method of the 9 Supremes it was difficult to unleash it under the current spiritual restraining formation, let alone sneak in. On the contrary, if he were to forcefully use it, he would only expose his whereabouts. It would be useless and detrimental. The most basic requirement to enter the city gate was to have a travel permit. However, Yun Yang did not have the Empire of Zio's travel permit. If he were to enter Zilong City with his original appearance, even if he would not be surrounded by enemies like when the 9 Supremes sneaked in, he would still become a target and a focal point. What was Yun Yang, the son of a marquis of the Empire of Yutang, a famed popinjay, suddenly coming to Zilong City? Especially at such a critical juncture. Was it not thought-provoking, and thought-provoking? If someone were to connect the dots, they might even be able to come up with something. Just the fact that Yun Yang could escape unscathed from the 4 Seasons Tower's 4 Venerable Lords' encirclement and even save the target that the 4 Venerable Lords wanted to kill was already shocking enough. Furthermore, although few people knew of Yun Yang's cultivation base and it was not in the eyes of Mr. Nian, the 4 Venerable Lords, or Lei Dongtian, he was already a true Heaven Realm cultivator. He was a level higher than the 10th perfection realm of this world's cultivators, which was publicly acknowledged by the secular world of Tianxian continent. The Empire of Zio's officials should not only be surprised by the arrival of such a pinnacle expert in Zilong City, they should be horrified. Looking at the east gate of Zilong City that was shrouded in the morning fog, Yun Yang suddenly felt that the place was like a giant mouth that was about to devour him. Once he entered, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven to come out again. Even with a cultivation base that was enough to look down on the world, he still did not have much sense of security. Yun Yang stared at it for a while, sucked in a breath and turned around quietly. Even if I can't come out alive after entering, I want to go in. Chapter 392. Putting aside how to enter Zilong City, while Yun Yang was burning with anxiety, he was also relieved. A trap. Since it was a trap, there must be bait. Yun Yang was absolutely sure that the bait was still there, which was why they dared to do this. Otherwise, it would be impossible. Without the bait, what trap was there to talk about? Therefore, Yun Yang was relieved about old Dugu's situation. Can't I go in if you set up the formation? Must I be caught if I go in? How naive. Looking at the city gate from afar, the seemingly ordinary but actually guarded by deific senses, a cold glint flashed across Yun Yang's eyes. It was a forest, 2,000 miles away from Zilong City. The mountain range here was continuous, and it was filled with dense forests. There were few people here. Because of this place had become a haven for mystical beasts. Of course, it was also a haven for mystical beast hunters, buyers, and bounty hunters. It was often said that heaven and hell were neighbors, but it was a textbook interpretation here. It was indeed so. Every day, there would be countless Xian beast hunters entering this mountain forest with all kinds of goals. However, there were also countless mystical beast hunters who fell in this forest every day. It was just that very few people dared to enter the core of this forest. Rumor had it that 9th-level mystical beasts often appeared here, making it an extremely dangerous place. Even a famous 10th perfection Grandmaster powerhouse would have his life in danger if he came here. Ordinary martial artists would naturally stay away from this place. Everyone hunted and preyed on beasts at the border, bringing back a few low-level mystical beasts to make ends meet. Those who were lucky could bring back mystical beast cubs to sell and earn a huge sum of money in the blink of an eye. Mystical beast cubs had always been popular in the buyer's market. Even a 3rd or 4th level mystical beast was highly sought after by the aristocrats. Mystical beasts were born with innate intelligence. They were much smarter than ordinary wild beasts. If they were tamed well, their intelligence would be comparable to a 7 or 8-year-old child. Keeping a beautiful and obedient mystical beast by one's side had long since become a popular trend among the nobles of the continent. It was a means of comparison. Yunyang spent 6 hours asking around before he morphed into his wind form and snuck into the forest quietly. He advanced forward without any reservations, his target going straight for the most dangerous area. With Yunyang's current cultivation base and manifestation ability, traversing the jungle, including the deepest and most dangerous areas, was a piece of cake. 2 hours later, the 2 9th-level beginner mystical beasts that lived next to each other in the depths of the forest but did not see eye to eye with each other had both been subdued by Yunyang. As far as the eye could see, a giant python that was 30 to 40 feet thick and over 200 feet long with brightly colored skin and a gigantic black bear that was 80 feet tall and as strong as a city wall were crouching before Yunyang's feet. At this moment, the 2 high-level dark beasts, a bear and a snake, could only shiver from head to toe. There wasn't the slightest trace of unruliness in their fierce eyes, only boundless terror. The black bear and the python said in unison, "I have never seen such a fierce person in my life." Among the 2 high-level mystical beasts, the black bear was the first to suffer. This Niello bear was one of the 2 hegemons of this jungle. As long as there was no provocation from a formidable opponent, its favorite thing to do was to lie down comfortably and bask in the sun, or to touch prettier female bears for exercise. Today, however, the stars of misfortune had fallen from the sky. The bear that was basking in the sun suddenly felt its vision darken as a human landed in front of it. The Niello bear's first thought was that its eyes were playing tricks on it. Or perhaps it was too comfortable basking in the sun that it had entered a dream. Furthermore, it was a beautiful dream. Otherwise, how could its favorite food appear so casually in its mouth? It slapped out almost instinctively, but it was this slap that started the bear's tragedy. The scenes were unbearable to recall. Faced with the bear's paw, the human did not retreat but advanced instead, charging forward to engage in close combat. Before the Niello bear could show that it was unprepared, its left eye was punched heavily. The force of this punch was F*King immense. The Niello bear's massive body, which weighed 7,300 kilograms, was beaten until it tumbled over. The bear was dumbfounded on the spot. "Are you F*King human? How can your strength be greater than mine? Could it be that this delicacy is not that easy to eat?" The Niello bear was waiting for its counterattack, trying its best to get the delicacy in front of it, but it saw the human attack a second time, grabbing the black bear and giving it a good beating. Punching the flesh was only the lowest level. Each punch was heavier than the one before, fiercer than the one before, fiercer than the one before, and fiercer than the one before. The pain pierced through the heart and lungs, and the pain was like a wave, surging wave after wave. After a series of punches and kicks, the black bear was completely knocked out. In the end, it simply covered its head, stuck out its buttocks and braced itself, relying on its rough skin and thick flesh, hoping that it could withstand this vicious beating. However, the other party's brutality seemed to have no end. After a few more blows, the bear felt as if stars were coming out of its eyes. Up until this moment, the bear was still confused. It could not speak, only howling. It really could not understand. Why? Why was that? How did I offend you? Why did you hit me like this? Even if I wanted to eat you, I had already taken action, but I did not succeed. Is there a need to do this to me? This is going to take this bear's old life. Also, this sudden delicacy really wasn't human at all. With a kick to his stomach, he couldn't help but fly up. Flying was a skill that this bear had yearned for a long time. However, there were also different types of flying, and there were differences, okay? No matter what, this bear was not willing to fly like this. Now, it was sent flying by someone. After flying hundreds of feet in the air, it was kicked again. Its internal organs felt as if they had turned upside down, and for the first time in its life, it felt like vomiting. This happened again and again, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. After being kicked for 17 or 18 times, with a loud bang, the yellow bear finally felt its feet on the ground again. Yes, that was not right. It was the feeling of its body landing on the ground. That was not right. There should have been an impact when its body landed on the ground. There should have been the feeling of being shaken by the earth. Why did it only feel soft and comfortable? The bear opened its eyes and realized that there were more than 10 large pythons under its body. It was these 10 large pythons that acted as a buffer for it. Of course, these 10 large pythons were all finished. They were all crushed to death. However, the death of these 10 pythons was not the yellow bear's focus. The bear's first thought was, "Oh my God, I have been beaten all the way, and I have been beaten all the way to the territory of my nemesis. This is the end. Behind me is the violent delicacy, and in front of me is my nemesis Duansheng. After being beaten up, I have little strength left. There is no way to survive. Isn't this a dead end?" Just as the bear had predicted, a hissing sound came from beside him. The only two top-notch mystical beasts, the moor python, rushed out ferociously. The moor python said, "Bear, you are courting death. How dare you come to my territory with such great fanfare? We have been living in harmony for so many years. It is not that I do not want to touch you. It is just that you can't beat me, and I can't beat you either. Sometimes, when we are full, we will fight and communicate, create some commotion, and defend our current authority. But today, did you not take your medicine? Did you forget to take your medicine? Did you take the wrong medicine? Or did you take fake medicine? Not only did you cause the forest to be filled with dust and smoke, you even barged into my house and sat on my many beloved concubines to death. This is intolerable. Who can tolerate this? Not even a snake." The moor python opened its huge mouth with a swoosh, ready to teach its nemesis an unforgettable lesson. If this bite were to land, with the bear's current physical condition, there was absolutely no room for him to dodge. He might even die in one bite. However, at the moment when the bear's life was in danger, the moor python's body suddenly stiffened. The tail of the moor python had been grabbed firmly. The moor python did not have time to think about what had happened. It suddenly felt itself rising up. It flew at a high speed, and then landed with a loud bang. The head of the moor python became the first landing point, and the landing target was impressively. The yellow bear opened its eyes wide, looking at the brutal delicacy with extreme horror. One of its hands had grabbed the tail of the moor python, and the moor python, which was more than 200 feet long, was used as a whip. After making a circle in the air, the moor python came down on the bear. What happened next was tragic. The heads of the bear and the snake had an unprecedented intimate contact. Both beasts felt dizzy and had a splitting headache at the same time. The black bear's first attack was like a huge baseball, flying out rapidly. However, it caught a glimpse of the horrifying delicacy, no, the horrifying humanoid monster, with the newly formed python whip, catching up to it. Boom, boom, boom. By the time Yun-Yang had vented all the negative emotions that had accumulated during this period of time and finally stopped, the yellow bear was sprawled on the ground, gasping for air and dying. Its two huge eyes were filled with fear that had reached the breaking point, and it dared not move. As for the newly formed python whip, the moor python had long been thrown off its joints. Its condition was even worse than the bear's. It lay on the ground, gasping and coughing, spitting out mouthfuls of blood from time to time. What was worse was the dizziness. Even when it had returned to the ground, it could still feel the earth spinning rapidly. Spinning. Spinning again. Ugh! The moor python opened its mouth abruptly this time, spitting out a puddle of emerald green stuff. Oh my God, did it shatter my gallbladder? Chapter 393. After a long time, when the dizziness faded slightly, the bear and the snake felt two tree branches under their necks, lifting their heads up. Without waiting for the tree branches to exert force, the bear and the snake lifted their heads obediently, gazing at the front with deep affection, taking in the world in their eyes once again. There was only one person in front of them. This person seemed really small in their eyes, the kind that could swallow a dozen of them in one gulp. It was this person who was squatting on the tree branch in front of them in an amiable manner. Hiss, hiss, the yellow bear and the moor python lowered their heads at the same time. This was an act of begging for mercy, an act of submission. The storm-like attack just now had made these two rulers of the jungle feel the fear of being dominated by an unstoppable force. They knew that they were no match for the human in front of them. If they did not submit, they would lose their lives. This had exceeded the understanding of the two kings of mystical beasts towards the upper limit of a human's power. The human figure in front of them was definitely not a human, but a devil. It was too terrifying. Do you submit? Yun-Yang asked with an amiable expression. His attitude and tone were simply too amiable. The bear and the snake nodded furiously when they heard him. As ninth-level mystical beasts, they could already understand human language despite only being at the beginner ninth level. Even if they could not, they could still distinguish the meaning of mental strength. At a time like this, if he still tried to be brave and said something like, "I'd rather die than accept this," then he would really have to say goodbye to this beautiful world. Yun-Yang frowned, feeling rather dissatisfied. Both of you are too big. This state makes me feel very uncomfortable. I actually have to lift my head to talk to both of you. It's so tiring. How can I not be tired? How could he not be tired? The most direct choice was to kill the two beasts. Naturally, he would not need to lift his head to talk. It was the simplest way of thinking. Hiss, the yellow bear's huge body trembled abruptly, its size shrinking instantly. It trembled again and shrunk another size. After trembling for 17 to 18 times, its size had become no different from an ordinary black bear, its eyes looking at Yun-Yang pitifully. Obviously, this was already its maximum size in its normal state. Yun-Yang shook his head resolutely. It's still too big. I want to look down on you. Do you understand? The yellow bear whimpered in aggrievement. Left with no other choice, it gritted its teeth and shook with all its might. Its entire body emitted a wave of intense bone-cracking sounds, and a wave of yellow misty brilliance was emitted from its body. As the light faded, a 3-foot-long furry miniature bear appeared before Yun-Yang. Its wet nose and adorable demeanor were sprawled on the ground, looking up at Yun-Yang. That's not bad. You have some awareness. Here's a reward for you. Yun-Yang was satisfied and extended his leg. The yellow bear ran over to receive its reward and stuck out its tongue to lick the devil's shoes clean. Roll. Schwa. Jump. Schwa. Jump with one leg. Puff. Yunyang was delighted. Not bad at all. You can stand aside now. I'll give you your reward later. The yellow bear felt as if it had been pardoned. It scurried to Yunyang's left and lay down in an exceptionally obedient and adorable position. Yunyang lifted his leg and the yellow bear crawled over cleverly, letting the devil's leg rest on its head so that the devil could feel more comfortable. As for the dignity of the mystical beast king, what was that? The yellow bear expressed that it was not important at all compared to the fear of being dominated by the devil. It was insignificant. If one's life was about to be forfeited, why would one care about dignity? As long as this bear could live, even if it had to eat sh*t, it could be considered, and it would gladly endure. Yunyang hummed in satisfaction at the bear's attitude, making the yellow bear feel intoxicated. Yunyang turned to look at the moor python and frowned. Why are you still so big? Do you want me to continue looking up at you? The moor python was so frightened that its gallbladder had shattered. It looked at Yunyang with pleading eyes, its head the size of a house smashing the ground desperately. After so many years of life, it knew that humans needed to kowtow when they begged for mercy. It was kowtowing now. Thump, 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 hiss, hiss, hiss. The moor python desperately released its mental energy to explain. The snake was scared to death. The look in its eyes was too ferocious. Are you saying that you can shrink as well? It's just that all the joints in your body have been dislocated by me? That's why you can't shrink? Are you lying to me? How could there be such a restriction? Yunyang tilted his head, his eyes filled with doubt. The moor python nodded its head desperately. There was no longer any viciousness or malice in its initially ferocious and indifferent eyes. Instead, they were filled with sincerity, pity, fear, and despair. If that's the case, it'll be easy. Yunyang flew up. Boom! He kicked the moor python's body. Behind him, the 3-foot-tall miniature bear shuddered subconsciously. Its old rival, the moor python that weighed tens of thousands of catties, had actually been kicked into the air. Why am I surprised? Didn't the devil whip me with the moor python just now? But a creature that only knew how to hiss for its entire life had actually let out a cry of agony after being kicked. What was going on? Furthermore, it was clearly that hateful python that had suffered an inhumane and crazy beating in front of him. Why would this bear feel as if he had experienced it himself? The terrifying devil had kicked the python a total of 108 times. It felt like it had been kicked 108 times as well. What was even more terrifying was that during this period, the python had not landed on the ground at all. It had been flying in the air. Yes, it had been kicked into the air. The yellow bear's eyes were filled with horror. Oh, my mother bear. I actually had the involuntary feeling of being dominated by the devil again. The indescribable fear. This was too horrifying. Poof! The moor python finally landed on the ground. Its appearance was already too horrible to look at. Are you done? Yunyang asked gently. You're not bad. You actually have 108 joints of bones. That's quite a lot. The moor python, which had regained its freedom of movement, did not dare to have the slightest hesitation. With a whoosh, its entire body coiled into a huge snake formation. Then, with all its strength, a layer of misty green light encircled its body. The huge snake formation immediately shrank at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Slowly, its body had shrunk into a small, ordinary python that was only a few feet long. It then released the snake formation and laid its entire body flat on the ground. It lifted its snake head in a flattering manner and looked up at a certain someone. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Yunyang nodded, not bad, not bad. However, legend has it that when the moor python has grown to 108 joints, there will be a luminous pearl in each joint. Are they all priceless treasures? The moor python's entire body was stiff. It looked at the devil in front of it in horror. It trembled all over and let out a sorrowful hiss from its mouth. The snake head that had shrunk to the size of a fist pounded on the ground desperately. "Spare me. I like luminous pearls," Yunyang said, "but I prefer obedient ones." The moor python and the yellow bear cried out anxiously at the same time, trying their best to show that they were obedient, that they were the most obedient. "I need to see evidence of obedience." Yunyang smiled in satisfaction. "For example, can the both of you be a little smaller?" The moor python and the yellow bear revealed a look of desperation at the same time. Just when Yunyang thought that these two fellows actually had a backbone and wanted to fight to the death, he heard two puffs. Another beam of yellow light and a green gas dispersed at the same time. The bear and the snake had shrunk a lot at the same time. The yellow bear was only 2 feet tall now, smaller than an ordinary black bear cub. It was impossible to tell that it was a bear tyrant. As for the moor python, it had shrunk to the size of a finger and was 3 to 4 feet long. However, it was still rather dazzling with its golden glow. Only then did Yunyang smile in satisfaction. "Now it's really not bad. How pleasing to the eye. How cute and cute." He was much stronger than the fiendish demeanor he had displayed just now. "Don't the both of you have any sense of aesthetics?" The bear and the snake were filled with helplessness. If they dared to cry, they would definitely bawl out loud. "We're mystical beasts. What's the use of being pleasing to the eye and cute?" That kind of miserable feeling filled his heart from beginning to end. This was the result of them having lost too much of their life force and forcefully shrunk back. After this incident, if he wanted to return to his original level, he would probably need at least 20 years of cultivation. In other words, this devil had made the two kings of the mystical beasts lose more than 10% of their combat power with just a single sentence. "Don't be so aggrieved. Come, I'll give you something good to eat. As long as the both of you are obedient, there will be more in the future." Yunyang casually sent out 2 balls of rich vitality, one for each of them, without any bias. When the bear and the snake saw the pure ball of vitality coming towards them, all 4 of their eyes widened in shock. They were dumbstruck. "Oh my God! What was this?" With a flash of golden light, the moor python had already swallowed its own ball of chi. When it turned its head and glared at the moor python, it realized that the mini bear had already swallowed the ball of chi with its 2 claws. Good stuff. It was really good stuff. It was just a ball of vitality, but it had already made up for all the losses just now, including the loss of being beaten, the loss of being forced to transform, the loss of internal organs, the loss of scales. All of it had been made up for, and there was even some left over. At once, the way the bear and the snake looked at Yunyang was completely different. A pair of snake's eyes and a pair of bear's eyes were glowing with a fervent light. "Big brother, why didn't you show off such a good thing earlier? If you did, you wouldn't have to do it yourself. We would have been convinced right away. You could have done it earlier, why didn't you? You'd done it earlier, you're good, we're good too. It's a pity that we got beaten up." Chapter 394. Yunyang's display of kindness and severity, his actions and mannerisms were impeccable, subduing the 2 fellows at once. He was convinced by it. They were completely at Yunyang's feet. They even felt like they belonged to him. There was no one else like him. "Listen to my commands from now on, understand?" Yunyang instructed earnestly. The bear and the snake nodded like chicks pecking at grains. They were the pacesetters of the underling circle. "As long as you listen to my commands, there'll be good food to eat, understand?" The 4 eyes of the bear and the snake immediately turned into luminous pearls that shone brightly. They hurriedly nodded again and again. Long drool dripped down from the mouth of the bear and the mouth of the snake. That degree could be said to be a textbook level of covetousness, perhaps even surpassing it. To both of them, as long as there was good food to eat, they would do anything they were told to do. He could be a slave, he could sell his body, he could do whatever he wanted. It was worth it to be beaten up like this every day. Yun-yang did not know that the bear and the snake had come to the same conclusion. He glanced at each other from the corner of his eyes and thought to himself, could this fellow be my competitor? It's either me or it in this forest, there's no way I can run away from the competition. All right. You can go home now and continue being kings. Yun-yang snorted, remember to be obedient. When I need you to work, don't play any tricks, don't run away, don't. After saying no for more than a dozen times, the bear and the snake were submissive, maintaining their pocket-sized bodies. They nodded and bowed before parting ways after a while. Yun-yang moved on to the next step of his plan after settling the 2 kings of the mystical beasts. The first was, of course, to stay here. His appearance had to be changed as well. After all, Yun-yang's appearance was too outstanding, he was a femme fatale, he had to change himself to a certain extent. However, it was not a difficult task for Yun-yang. In just a quarter of an hour, Yun-yang had transformed himself into a hermit who had lived in seclusion here for many, many years. He couldn't tell how old he was. He wasn't handsome or ugly, and he wasn't very tall either. He was about 1.75 meters tall, which was about average. Only his eyes were unusually clear, like those of a child. The shoes on his feet were also replaced with beast-skin piercings. Only the clothes on his body were still the same, but they had also been modified to look a bit more shabby. However, the biggest change in Yun-yang was that he still carried the scent of the forest. With 2 rumbling sounds, a cave was created on the mountain wall. Inside the cave, a bend was made, and after some slight decorations, it turned into a bedroom. After thinking for a while, he made a stone door at the crooked place. He threw some Xian beast furs outside and burned them at the top and corners of the cave, making it look like the cave had been smothered for many years. Then, a stream of water was released by him. The cave had traces of being washed away by the flood. It was only an hour later when a cave that had been inhabited for decades, or even centuries, was created in an antique and vivid manner. Yun-yang morphed into his wind manifestation and went out for a spin. His hands were filled with countless feathers of birds. He then turned the mystical chi of water and fire, which converged into a form of evaporation. The feathers became clean at once. He made a bed and 2 blankets were tossed casually on top of it. Now, the sleeping project was completed. Yun-yang decided to take a nap in the cave. Feeling the sleeping environment in his own body, he actually felt quite comfortable. His deific consciousness spread throughout the dense forest. Through his deific consciousness, Yun-yang knew that there seemed to be no less than a few thousand people who had entered the forest within this day and night. Although they were still limited to loitering around the periphery, the base number was already very large. The dense forest occupied a vast area. Yun-yang judged that even if tens of thousands of people came in, as long as they were not in a group and came in from the same direction, they might not be able to meet each other. In one day and night, hundreds of people had entered, adding up to thousands of people. Some had left, some had died, some were still wandering around. Yun-yang ignored them, because the people he was waiting for were not these people. Now, Yun-yang was not as anxious as he was at the beginning. He was not even the slightest bit anxious. Since the other party had set up such a trap with the intention of targeting the 9 Supremes, old Dugu, who was the absolute bait, would definitely be safe. With this confirmation, Yun-yang could proceed with ease and make more and more thorough preparations. In this dense forest, aside from Xian beast hunters, merchants, and hunting teams. There would also be people taking part in the trial by fire. Individuals taking part in the trial by fire, sects taking part in the trial by fire, as well as the young masters of official clans coming out to hunt. Regarding this, Yun Yang had already investigated it thoroughly and had planned accordingly. Subduing the two mystical beasts was the first step. If there were no such mystical beasts in the forest, Yun Yang would naturally look for other high-level mystical beasts. Yun Yang was waiting for an opportunity. If Supreme Cloud were to say that he was the second best in the world and it came to waiting for and creating opportunities, no one would be so confident to say that they were the first. For the sake of secrecy, Yun Yang did not even use the Eclipse Panther. What he needed to do now was to wait for a group of people who were more influential, more promising, and had a background, to form a connection with them and then carry out his follow-up plan. Yun Yang did not care who these people were who would fall into his trap. They could be from the military or even the aristocratic families. These were not important to Yun Yang, nor did they have much meaning. However, as long as such people appeared, Yun Yang was confident that he could use their influence to sneak into Zilong City and even accomplish many things with their strength. If I knew that this would happen, I should have gotten a few travel passes from various empires. At the very least, I should have asked Shui Wuyin to activate the spies in various places to provide support. I wouldn't have been so unprepared like this, relying on my own improvisation. The situation is too uncontrollable. Yun Yang sighed inwardly, deciding to do it when he returned. Actually, Yun Yang could not be blamed for not being prepared. The 9 Supremes' incarnations were ever-changing and could almost deal with any chaos in the world. Since when would they need something as mundane as a travel pass? In spite of this, Yun Yang was truly speechless when he encountered such a situation this time around. Suddenly, there was a burst of shouting and neighing in the dense forest. The noise was unexpectedly noisy. A large group of hunters had entered the outer forest. Yun Yang, on the other hand, wore a sneer on his face. Popinjays who could create such a commotion were everywhere. It's time to move. Young Master Lan, we can't go any further. A few hundred miles further and we'll enter the boundary of the 9th-level mystical beasts' territory. Let's search for traces of mystical beasts nearby. A man in black said respectfully. Shut up. Another youth's expression darkened. Whether we go forward or not, it's not up to you to decide. Young Master Lan has his own plans. We'll just listen. The one who spoke was obviously a bootlicker. The leader of this group of people was a tall and straight young man in embroidered clothes with a fair face. This young man had a natural arrogant look on his face. He had a slight smile on his face and appeared very calm. After a while, the chattering voices of a woman could be heard. The environment and scenery of this place is not bad, but the road is a little hard to walk. Sister Bai is right. There are so many people in charge of clearing the way, but my cloak is still torn. They're all just people who are here to make up the numbers. The quality of today's harvest is average. A girl in blue said faintly, but the overall number is not small. Why don't we call it a day and go back? The girl in blue looked indifferent, but her words seemed to have an ulterior motive. Another girl heard her and said, how can we stop here? We still haven't seen the cloud-smoky squirrel that Sister Z wants. If we go back now, we don't know when we'll be able to come out again. Now that the situation is so tense, it's not easy for us to come out. As soon as the young girl said this, the expressions of the young men around her all changed. Due to their pride as men, they could not say the words that they wanted to go back. After all, they were in front of the girl they liked. How could they admit defeat? That was something that most young men in puberty would never do. The embroidered-clothed youth smiled and said, it's still early now, and we've only been out for 3 days. I'm sure everyone is unwilling to call it quits just like that. Moreover, our team has more than 200 people, and there's no lack of experts among us. We've come with such great fanfare, but in the end, we've only caught a few third-grade Xian beasts. Wouldn't we be laughed at to death by others? Another youth laughed and said, Young Master Lan's words are reasonable. Last time, those bastards brought back a few fifth-grade mystical beasts and almost bragged about it to the heavens. If we go back like this, it'll really be a little degrading. Actually, I don't mind, but young Master Lan. The leader, young Master Lan, smiled and said, It's fine if I lose some face. It's just that the cloud-smoky squirrel that Miss Yun Yen has been longing for is unforgivable. The girl in blue smiled and said, It's just a cloud-smoky squirrel. Everyone's safety is more important. I believe that as long as we miss this period of time, there will be plenty of opportunities to get it. Another girl pouted and said, How can a cloud-smoky squirrel be easy to get? If it was that easy, Sister Yun Yen wouldn't have waited for so many years. It's rare that the cloud-smoky squirrel matches Sister Yun Yan's name so well. It's like a match made in heaven. We came here in high spirits, so how can we not enjoy ourselves? Let's continue walking. Okay. The 5 or 6 youths all agreed at the same time. Their eyes swept across the faces of the girls who came with them. Look, a cloud-smoky squirrel. One of the girls shouted. A small animal could be seen hopping between the dense foliage in front of them, running away in a panic. The girl in blue's eyes brightened. Chapter 395. Go after it. The girls were about to rush out. Wait. Young Master Lan stopped them and said, If we find it, we won't be afraid of it escaping. However, it's better to be more cautious in this dangerous area. The girl in blue smiled reservedly, but her eyes flashed with displeasure. The young man in embroidered robes pondered for a while and said, If we continue forward, the mystical beasts will inevitably become stronger. Everyone, pay attention to our surroundings. Elder Hu, Elder Song, you guys who are skilled in mystical cultivation should pay close attention. The few elders spoke in unison, We dare not be called that by young Master Lan. We dare not to do our best. The young man in embroidered robes smiled and said, For the sake of safety, everyone should form a defensive circle. The girls will command in the center, while the rest of us will each look in one direction. This way, even if something happens, we will still have room to react. This young man in embroidered robes seemed to know how to do things. Especially when he said that the girls would command in the center, it made the 5 girls smile. The so-called command was fake, the real thing was to protect everyone. But this sentence was a step ahead to protect the self-esteem of those girls. It was really a painstaking effort. There are not many people here anymore, there are almost no traces of people walking by. The group of people whispered as they walked. That cloud squirrel seems to have gone that way, it jumped just now, so fast. But it's so cute, no wonder Sister Yun Yen likes it. Above their heads, the fluttering of startled birds could be heard from time to time. As they chased after the so-called cloud squirrel, they unknowingly went deeper and deeper into the forest, but there was no movement in their surroundings. It was calm and peaceful, so they did not pay much attention to it. Finally, swoosh, swoosh, a strange sound suddenly rang out. Everyone didn't dare to be negligent, and they all crouched down to conceal their figures. Only then did they look over warily, only to see a few Xian beasts, like a gust of wind, disappear into the dense forest in front of them with a schwa sound. Gale wolves. That's a 6th-level mystical beast, gale wolves. Elder Hu's expression was relaxed as he said, Young masters and young ladies, you don't have to worry. Although the gale wolves habitually move in groups, they definitely won't pose a threat to us. On the other hand, if we're lucky enough to find the location of their nest, we might even be able to bring back a few dozen gale wolf pups. Young Master Lan will be rich. Young Master Lan smiled reservedly and said, Yes, a 6th-tier mystical beast's cub can indeed make a fortune. However, how can I be the only one to make a fortune? Everyone here should have a share. Everyone present, including the girls, were obviously frequent hunters in this area. At this moment, there was no fear on their faces. Whooshing sounds continued to ring out in front. When everyone looked in the direction of the sounds, they saw packs of Gale wolves fleeing in panic. However, for some unknown reason, a group of leopards were fleeing for their lives in panic. Behind them were a group of pangolins. They might not be as fast as the wind wolves or leopards, but they were still fleeing as if their lives depended on it. Another group, just like that, no less than 20 to 30 types of mystical beasts passed by in a row. All of them were fleeing in groups, as if they were avoiding some kind of terrorist attack. We've seen quite a number of mystical beasts today. It's a pity that they're fleeing too quickly. This forest is extremely vast. Once we miss them, it'll be difficult to attack. A youth said regretfully. That's right, that's right. I've been counting along the way. There have been 28 to 29 mystical beast hordes. How could there be such a commotion? Another youth shook his head, showing off his extraordinary memory that far surpassed that of his peers. In the crowd, Elder Song's expression suddenly changed when he heard this. He seemed to have thought of something and his expression instantly changed. Young Master Lan. Elder Song took a few steps forward and said, I'm afraid the situation is not good. We need to retreat immediately before it's too late. Young Master Lan frowned and asked, What's wrong? What do you mean by that? The mystical beasts are fleeing in such a large group. It's very likely that there are high-level mystical beasts heading this way. If it's true. Elder Song's face was already drenched in sweat. It was obvious that his heart was no longer just a if, but rather a 10,000. This young Master Lan was not a stubborn and stupid person. He was instantly shocked when he heard this. He readily agreed and said, That's right, that's right. Everyone, retreat quickly. Unfortunately, it was already too late to retreat now. Actually, it was already too late. They were originally targeting the target. Their movements were also the signal for the start of the operation. At this moment, they were just pulling the curtain to the end to make it more realistic. The entire dark forest was suddenly filled with rustling sounds. The rustling sounds came from all directions, and it seemed to encompass the entire world. At the same time as the rustling sound was heard, a faint stench of blood could be smelled. It's a group of snakes. A large group of snakes. Elder Song's expression changed. It's too late to retreat now. Quickly clear an empty space and build a defensive line to deal with the incoming danger. Old Kong, quick. As he spoke, he was the first to unsheath his sword and cut a large tree in half. Following that, he kicked the broken tree far away. A few experts moved upon hearing the news. Together with the 200 guards, they moved. Swoosh swoosh swoosh, in the blink of an eye, the hundreds of trees around them had been cleared away. Even the weeds on the ground were pulled up and piled up around them. Following that, layers of realgar, sulfur, and other repellent drugs were densely laid out in more than 10 layers. The haystacks were even doused with kerosene. In the middle of all this was an empty space of several hundred feet. The people had already lit up the matches in their hands. Their faces were filled with nervousness. Once they realized that something was wrong, they would ignite the fire without hesitation. As long as the fire was ignited, it would form a defensive line that would block the mystical beast's attacks. This would greatly increase the chances of survival for their side. It had to be said that these people's response was quite methodical. Complemented by their manpower, material resources, and comprehensive combat power, the ordinary attacks of the serpents would not be able to shake their formation. However, the lingering rustling sound was getting more and more intense and ear-piercing. The stench of blood was also getting stronger and stronger. Everyone tried their best to look into the distance. In an instant, their faces turned pale. Their bodies were covered in cold sweat. The girls in the most central position were even shivering. As far as the eye could see, there were all kinds of venomous snakes coming from all directions. It was as if the place where everyone was standing had become the gathering point. Countless venomous snakes were crawling on the ground. Some were crawling between the branches. There were even some that had gradually approached the outer circle of trees, coiling around them. Slowly, all the trees and branches outside the defensive line were covered with venomous snakes. The density of the venomous snakes had almost reached the point where the leaves of these trees could not be seen. The situation was already extremely bad, but the rustling sound in the distance did not stop. There was also the sound of a large body being dragged on the ground. That was a large poisonous snake, and it was actually rushing over in batches. Everyone's faces had already turned deathly pale. Up until now, the number of venomous snakes that could be seen had already exceeded 10 million. The forest around the defensive line could be said to have been filled with venomous snakes. Yes, it was filled. There were venomous snakes everywhere. There was nothing else. After a while, there were continuous snapping sounds. That was the sound of some branches breaking because they could not bear the weight of the venomous snakes. The trees here were all very old. Their quality was naturally much higher than normal trees. Many branches could not bear the weight of the venomous snakes and broke. This meant that there were at least 10 to 20 venomous snakes entrenched on a tree branch at the same time. The number of snakes and the density of the snakes had already reached a point where even wind could not pass through. Needless to say, the first batch of snakes had already coiled on the ground. The snakes flicked their tongues in and out, extremely arrogant. "It's over." Young Master Land's face was pale. "It is said that there is a snake king in this mountain range. I'm afraid it is making a move. This time, everyone, pay attention." Elder Hu's face was also pale. "The only thing we can do now is to fight to the death and seek survival in the midst of death. We have a total of 230 people. Our individual strength is far superior to that of the snakes. It would be a waste to fight at the same time. Moreover, we will not have time to rest and recover. There will be no room for maneuver. We will split into 3 teams. Each team will have to resist for at least 2 hours. Also, all the young masters and young mistresses, please quickly send out the distress signal that you are carrying and ask for backup. In this way, we might still have a chance of survival." The young masters and young mistresses of the big families were all flustered. They took out the signal rockets. A few of them trembled and dropped the signal rockets on the ground. It could be seen that their reaction time was really terrible. Luckily, the signal rockets were not too weak. In the end, they still sent out all of them in a hurry. Bang, 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 in the sky, there were continuous explosions. The thick smoke did not disperse for a long time. "Don't send out all the distress signals in one go." Elder Chen almost vomited blood. These people actually sent out all the distress signals in one go. This is practically asking for death. Do you think that if you send out the signal rockets once, someone will definitely see it? Do you think you are a person blessed by the heavens? The surrounding snakes were still gathering. There were more and more of them gathering. They were almost piling up. Layer by layer, they surged up, but they had yet to launch an attack. However, this was more frightening than a simple attack. It was like a nightmare, causing all the young masters and young mistresses to feel dizzy. Many people even vomited directly. A few women even vomited out their bile. The few old men and guards all expressed their helplessness towards the performance of these young masters and young mistresses. Accompanying this group of fellows was simply the worst luck of 8 lifetimes. This group of young masters and young mistresses looked bright and beautiful, as if they were all dragons and phoenixes among men. However, when faced with such a life and death situation, they were of no use at all. Instead, they could only be a burden. The people who were looking forward to the arrival of reinforcements found that the situation was getting more and more disadvantageous. The swishing sounds in the surroundings were actually getting louder and louder. "Look! Oh my God!" A voice of despair blurted out. Giant snakes as thick as water buckets suddenly appeared in all directions. There seemed to be thicker, bigger, and longer snakes in the distance. All of them were winding their way over. At this moment, everyone had lost confidence in whether they could survive or not. It was also at this moment that the snakes began to attack. Suddenly, all the poisonous snakes on the trees fell down. Immediately, there was a layer of poisonous snake bed, or perhaps it was a poisonous snake tread, that was 5 feet thick. It had already covered all the smell of the drugs. Then, the super fierce lineup of tens of millions of vipers surged over from all directions as if they were toppling mountains and overturning seas. Chapter 396. Light the fire. A shrill voice rang out. The voice was already trembling. A ball of fire suddenly shone, and with a boom, a wall of fire instantly appeared in the surroundings. Countless poisonous snakes screamed, struggling and convulsing in the sea of fire. A strange barbecued smell quickly filled the sky. Seeing that the ambush of the wall of fire had worked, everyone was just relieved, but they heard a strange cry from afar. Hiss, hiss, in an instant, all the poisonous snakes seemed to have gone mad. They rushed forward with all their might, completely ignoring the sea of fire that had already swallowed countless of their companions. There were also many giant pythons who rushed into the sea of fire without fear of death, using their huge bodies as a medium to extinguish the fire. In just a short time, everyone was despairing to find that the wall of fire that had just risen, the wall of fire that had brought hope to everyone, had disappeared like a flash in the pan. Thousands of giant pythons were using their own bodies to suppress the raging fire that could burn the entire mountain range into wisps of green smoke. Just to extinguish the fire, thousands of giant pythons had died. And during this period, countless small poisonous snakes were crushed to death and burned to death. However, the python's strategy was effective. The fire had been extinguished, and the following groups of snakes attacked. At this point, people and snakes officially engaged in close combat. More than 200 strong men desperately waved their weapons. Although there was despair on their faces, they still began to work hard in vain for the continuation of their lives. As for those few young masters and young ladies, they had long been scared like quails, hiding in the inner circle, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. The battle between the guards and the snakes could be said to be extremely tragic. Although there were many snakes, they had an advantage in numbers. They did not have high-end combat power. Even if they had the power of poison, it was difficult for them to harm a group of guards with good cultivation. Therefore, the guards quickly stabilized their footing. A large number of poisonous snakes rushed up like a rising tide, and then were all sent flying. Broken snake corpses could be seen everywhere. On the ground, many snake corpses that had been broken into several pieces were still convulsing and twisting, looking extremely ferocious. In just a moment, a thick layer of snake corpses had formed. Swoosh 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 sounds continued in the distance, and countless giant pythons approached. As soon as they got close, they didn't hesitate to lash out. The group of guards, who had an absolute advantage in combat power, had killed at least 1 million poisonous snakes in just 2 hours. However, the snake group's advantage in numbers gradually showed its power. They were not afraid of death and continued to attack without interruption. All the martial artists on the other side, even if their combat strength was far superior and their cultivation was not ordinary, their chi cultivation had a limit. At this point, they were already exhausted, unable to continue. However, the snakes were still coming. It seemed that from their eyes to the edge of the sky, the snakes had already filled up the entire area. In the face of such a situation, everyone felt despair. As the saying goes, ants can also devour elephants. It was not that elephants were not large and their combat power was not strong. It was just that there were too many ants. When the number of a creature reached a certain scale, when this scale was enough to exhaust the enemy to death, no matter what kind of expert the enemy was originally, they would inevitably fall. At first, everyone was still glad that it was winter. The snakes would not be very active in this season. But now, that happiness had flown beyond the clouds, or maybe it had vanished into thin air. In short, there was no longer any trace of happiness left. Swoosh, 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 countless poisonous snakes flew from the treetops, directly using their bodies as arrows. There were too many poisonous snakes piled up on the ground. Because the follow-up troops had no foothold, there was no room for them to fight. Instead, they climbed up the treetops and launched a combined attack. At this time, the attack of the snakes had formed a momentum of heaven and earth, and there were poisonous snakes everywhere. Bang bang, no matter how hard everyone tried to resist, there was finally an inevitable gap. Ah! A shrill cry suddenly sounded out as a guard was bitten by a venomous snake. Even though he'd already activated his profound energy to blast the venomous snake flying at the first possible moment, he couldn't help but stop for a moment in the end, and it was only that moment of stagnation that caused hundreds of venomous snakes to wrap around him tightly. He was still struggling on the ground, rolling, desperately urging his mystical chi, hoping to shake off the poisonous snakes on his body. It was even effective, but it only led to more poisonous snakes pouncing on him. After a few breaths, a complete set of white bones appeared on the ground. Yes, it was pure white bones, without a trace of flesh and blood. Looking at this set of white bones, everyone's heart turned cold. Their scalps went numb, and their hearts jumped. Just a moment ago, there were still living people who could walk, jump, fight, and kill. As if this was the beginning, the screams that belonged to humans continued to ring out, and people were constantly being pounced on by the snakes. From the team of more than 200 people, after the first person fell, in less than an hour, more than 100 people had fallen. Seeing that victory was close at hand, the snakes attacked even more fiercely. At this time, the few young boys and girls could only scream loudly, and their screams were particularly sharp and miserable. They had lived in luxury since childhood, with hundreds responding to a single call. When had they ever seen such a terrifying scene? They believed that even if they could escape in the end, this encounter would become a lifelong nightmare for them. After another wave of strong attacks from the snakes, there were less than 20 people who could stand on their side. The shadow of death, the atmosphere of despair, mercilessly shrouded all the living people present. No one had thought that before they could think about how to enjoy life, they would first consider dying in the mouths of snakes. This was the most typical case of dying without a whole corpse. Seeing that everyone was in danger, and there was no chance of survival, at this moment, the attacks of the snakes suddenly stopped, and they retreated in an orderly manner. Seeing that they and the others were about to face the fate of being dismembered, the 17 or 18 people all breathed a sigh of relief. However, the threat of death was still close at hand. The air was now seriously suffocating, and it was full of the smell of blood. It was all the unique stench of snakes. Even the toilet shared by tens of thousands of people for a year without being cleaned would smell much fresher than here. However, even if it was this kind of air, at this moment, no one despised it, and tried their best to breathe in big mouthfuls of air. Even if it was such a smell, it still belonged to the human world. Perhaps with a breath, it would be a different path to the underworld, no longer a part of the mortal world. The surroundings were still full of densely packed snakes. The most eye-catching were the pythons, thick as buckets, thick as vats, and, even thicker, everyone's eyes were filled with horror and despair. Looking into the distance, not knowing what their fate would be. Would they be buried in the mouths of the snakes, or would there be other results? Staying in despair and hopelessness was actually more difficult to bear than death. After all, the feeling of death was only a moment, and the past was the past. But now, it was a constant torture. However, even if it was torture, the survivors were still willing to continue. After all, compared to death, being able to live was better. On the other side, there was a rustling sound, as if a mountain was advancing. In front of everyone's eyes that were filled with despair, an indescribably huge python, which was like the entire mountain, was moving, leisurely coming in this direction, with its body covered in brightly colored patterns. Wherever it passed, all the trees, no matter how thick, would be broken because of its advance, without any room to stop it. Along the way, the mountains fell, the earth cracked, and the water flowed backwards. Everyone's eyes were open to the widest. At this moment, there was only a feeling as if their souls were flying away. What kind of snake was this? That body should be at least 3 to 4 feet thick, right? That body size was as long as 20 feet, right? Perhaps it was even more than 20 feet. Its entire body was covered in brightly colored scales. When it got close, the giant snake suddenly raised its head, rising at least 100 feet high in an instant. Its cold eyes stared at the survivors on the ground, as if it was a god looking down at ants, looking down from a high vantage point. Facing such a ferocious god, everyone softened. Although they were in despair before, they still had the courage to fight, and even hoped that a miracle would happen, such as the family coincidentally seeing the distress signal flare and sending people over. But now, with the appearance of this huge snake, not only did they not have the courage to resist, they even lost the extravagant hope of fantasizing. Even if all the top forces of these families were gathered here, could they deal with this super-huge python that seemed to be extremely powerful? A few girls widened their eyes in horror, staring at the super-huge snake without blinking. Their minds were already in a mess, and they were completely unable to think. They only regretted not fainting. If they fainted, even if they died, at least they wouldn't have to face reality and feel it. The visual impact in front of them was really too strong. Is there? As soon as this giant python appeared, all the poisonous snakes and pythons prostrated themselves on the ground obediently, showing their absolute submission. Snake King. This was definitely the true Snake King. There was no doubt, no dispute, no doubt. Just that aura alone was enough to suppress everyone to the point that they couldn't move. It's over. It's all over. That young Master Lan threw the long sword in his hand to the ground weakly, his face ashen. He turned to look at Miss Xi Yunyan, his heart full of bitterness. Initially, he wanted to bring the beauty out to play and show off his bravery and wisdom. If he could catch a cloudy smoke squirrel for the beauty today, it would be even more perfect, and it would also improve their relationship. His plan was perfect, but the reality was tragic. The result was like this, directly sending everyone to their graves. Facing such a Snake King, not to mention the possibility of reinforcements, even if there were tens of thousands of troops, it would still be futile and irreversible. Hiss, the Snake King lowered its head and hissed. Instantly, a gust of wind blew, and the few girls closed their eyes and screamed. At this moment, what ladies, what demeanor, what martial arts experts, all the so-called demeanor, all of it was gone. Hiss, the Snake King roared at the sky, showing off its might. Below, 7 or 8 people were trembling. One of them suddenly cried out and moaned. After his body twitched a few times, there was no more movement. Apparently, he was scared to death. The Moor python's big eyes almost popped out. F***ck, I didn't do anything. How did he die? I wonder if this will spoil the master's plan. And, these people are obviously scared out of their wits. Why hasn't the master come out yet? Chapter 397. The people who were surrounded by the snakes perked up immediately. Their eyes were filled with hope as they looked towards the direction where the melodious sound of the flute was coming from. Had a savior arrived? Had a reclusive expert come to save us? This was probably the only thing that could save them at the moment. Save us! Young Master Lan screamed, tears streaming down his face. He no longer had the demeanor of a young master from an aristocratic family. Save us! Save us! The others came to their senses as well and began to scream. The cries of the women were especially loud. Demeanor at the juncture of life and death? Demeanor? What was that? The sound of the flute was melodious, but no one knew what song it was. In short, everyone was pleasantly surprised to find that the Serpent King seemed to be very anxious because of the melodious sound of the flute. Her body was coiled up, and her forked tongue was several feet long. The little snakes also began to stir, the sound of the flute was getting closer. The crowd's eyes were filled with longing. They finally saw a silhouette in the distance, walking slowly from the grassland on the other side. A flute was placed between his lips as he ignored the venomous snakes that covered the entire mountain. The sound of the flute continued, still melodious. However, the venomous snakes that covered the entire mountain began to retreat. The snakes at the outermost layer had already turned their bodies and swaggered away, as if a fatal threat was approaching. It was better to leave this place as soon as possible. Swoosh, 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 the crowd cried as they watched the venomous snakes retreat from the outermost layer. Then, the venomous snakes within also began to swim away. Finally, only the Snake King remained stubbornly in its original spot. It coiled its huge snake formation and began to fight against this strange expert. The crowd heaved a sigh of relief. Looking at the current situation, there seemed to be hope. Although this expert's clothes looked a little tattered, they looked clean. As for the expert's age, they could not tell how old he was, but he was definitely not young. For an expert to be able to fight against the Snake King, he must have cultivated for a considerable amount of time. How could one tell the age of such an unparalleled expert just by looking at his face? As the saying goes, one small clue can reveal the general trend. Looking at that expert's appearance, it was likely that he had lived in this forest for many years. Everyone was thinking about how to ask for help so that the super-giant Serpent King could leave with them. Unexpectedly, they saw a scene that made them even more dumbfounded and incredulous. That unworldly expert walked to the front of the incomparably huge Serpent King, kicked it without any hesitation, and scolded, "Evil creature! You dare to bully the weak, eat people, and kill people. Do you not learn from your mistakes?" Everyone's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets. The Snake King's coiled snake formation collapsed in an instant. Its entire body lay on the ground and sneakily walked back. It was obvious that it wanted to retreat. "Get lost!" Yun Yang, the otherworldly expert, hollered domineeringly, "If I see you eating humans again, I'll break your bones." The Snake King felt as if he had been pardoned by the Emperor when he heard the order to retreat. So, he disappeared with a whooshing sound. At this point, the shadow of death finally dispersed. Young Master Lan and the rest of the 17 survivors saw that the shadow of death had disappeared and life had returned. Relieved, they collapsed to the ground, trembling all over. For a moment, they could not even speak. The otherworldly expert looked at the piles of bones and was silent for a moment before he murmured, "Life and death are fleeting. I've come too late after all." As a descendant of an aristocratic family, young Master Lan instantly regained his proper demeanor as soon as he regained his vitality. He stood up at once and, in a display of etiquette, quickly took a step forward and bowed respectfully to the ground. "Thank you, Senior, for saving my life. This junior is grateful. I only regret that I can't repay you, that I can't repay even a fraction of Senior's kindness." The rest of the survivors seemed to be enlightened as well, standing up persistently and kneeling on the ground to pay their respects. Yunyang said faintly, "There's no need for that. It's only a matter of convenience to me. Go back to where you came from. It's not safe to stay here, leave quickly." Young Master Lan looked troubled as he pleaded, "Please be merciful, Senior. I have a few companions here who have been bitten by venomous snakes. Their basic chi is depleted and they can't save themselves. Please, Senior." A total of 9 of the 17 survivors had been bitten by venomous snakes. Although they had consumed medicine, the effect was obviously not that effective. Although the venom of the venomous snakes could not do anything to ace cultivators, it depended on the condition of the ace cultivator when he was poisoned. If he had suppressed the poison with his cultivation base at once or even eliminated it, he would have been fine. However, the battle just now had been perilous. Those who had been poisoned had exhausted their mystical chi but were still unable to deal with the snakes. How could they have the time to calm down and remove the venom? Afterward, their mystical chi had been depleted, causing the venom to spread throughout their bodies. Even their faces were covered in black gas. In such a situation, it would be difficult for the poison to save themselves even if they were healthy. To those who had been poisoned, they had just escaped death and now they were in danger of being poisoned. Today was truly the worst day of their lives. Yunyang checked and said with a frown, "It's a little difficult indeed. Carry them and follow me." Having said that, he turned and walked away. Young Master Lan and the rest carried the people on their backs respectfully and followed behind him. All of them had a strong feeling, "We've met a real expert today. A real expert of unparalleled power. This crisis might just be a test before a great fortuitous opportunity. We're actually blessed by the heavens." The snake and bear, who were watching from afar, could vaguely guess what the survivors were thinking when they saw the genuine joy on their faces. They snorted in disdain, "Why do you think so? Why don't you go to heaven if your imagination is so wild?" When they saw the huge cave where this otherworldly expert lived, as well as the scenery outside the cave, especially the unusually strong smell of wine, they already had a pretty good guess in their hearts. The injured person only has the venom of the snakes that has gone berserk and spread throughout his body. It's fine. He'll be fine as long as he takes this medicine. Yunyang fished out a piece of black medicine from somewhere on the wall of the cave and passed it over. "Take half of it orally and apply the other half externally. Dispel the poison and heal the wound." The black medicine looked inconspicuous but its effect was remarkable. Just as the medicine was applied, the poisonous air on the victim's face faded quickly and the wounds began to bleed poisoned blood. Within the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the blood had already turned crimson red. This meant that at least 90% of the poison in the victim's body had been dispelled. The group also realized that the black medicine was not only effective against poison, it was also shockingly effective in replenishing mystical chi. The poison victim's internal energy was severely damaged and his cultivation base would drop by at least a level even if he was lucky enough to survive. Unexpectedly, after consuming the black medicine, not only was the poison instantly dispelled, his basic chi had also recovered by 40 to 50%. Furthermore, the basic chi in his dantian continued to grow and nourish his meridians. All of these proved that the poison victim's cultivation base would not regress because of this poisoning. This was a miraculous medicine that could dispel poison, heal and restore one's vitality. This was a fortuitous encounter, a heaven-sent opportunity. Rest here for a day. Do not act rashly. Yunyang said coldly, "You must leave tomorrow." The group had just calmed down from the shock, so naturally, they all agreed respectfully. It was said that most of these otherworldly experts had strange tempers and were cautious. There was nothing wrong with that. Although it was difficult to find a comfortable bed to rest in the cave, the group felt an unprecedented sense of security, stability, and peace of mind. Compared to this moment, they could not help recalling the bloody scene earlier. It was like a nightmare that they could not bear to recall. A few of the girls could not help but start sobbing, tears streaming down their cheeks. The young masters lowered their heads in dejection as well. So many lives had been lost because of a single hunt. Young Master Lan sighed and said, "When we go back, let's go back the way we came. We must collect their corpses." Sigh. Although it was sorrowful, the joy of surviving a calamity still took up a large part of it, especially when they had met such an otherworldly expert. The boys and girls laid down without a care for their image, breathing in the human air that they thought they would never be able to breathe again. Gradually, their emotions calmed down. Then, the girls began to tidy up their appearances. What followed was naturally the sound of chattering. "Who do you think that person is?" "I don't know, but from the looks of it, he's been living here." Another girl looked at the surroundings. "It must have been a few decades." "A few decades?" "Not only that, I think he's been here for at least 100 years. Yes, look at these marks. Here, and here, especially this stone stool, it's slippery from sitting on it, but, what kind of person could stay in such a place for so long? It must be an unparalleled genius. Just look at what he did to the giant snake. If he didn't have an astounding cultivation base, how could he do that?" Listening to the whispers, Yunyang felt a chill run down his spine. Chapter 398. For those in power, people with special abilities were always extraordinary strategic resources, the more the better. Especially in such a chaotic era, it was a blessing from the heavens that he was fortunate enough to meet such an expert. How could he miss this opportunity? Such an unparalleled expert was definitely qualified to be the anchor of any family. Young Master Lan wondered if his identity as a member of Zio's noble family, from the residence of the Chancellor, if he succeeded, it would be the foundation of his family's prosperity. The cave's door flashed. When the group turned around, they saw a 2-foot-tall miniature bear standing at the cave's entrance in a daze. Its round eyes were looking at the people in the cave, looking adorably naive. It seemed to be wondering if it had gone to the wrong door, even turning to take a look to make sure it was right. When it turned back, it was even more perplexed, scratching its head at the cave's entrance. In the front paw of the little bear, there was shockingly a large bucket of water. What a cute little bear. A girl's eyes began to sparkle. So cute, so adorable, so silly, but she really wanted to touch and hug this little bear. This was obviously a little bear that had not grown up yet. The girls were conquered by the bear's silly cuteness at once. At this time, Yun Yang's voice rang out, "Dummy, bring the water in." The little bear carried the water strenuously and walked in evasively. Its eyes were filled with surprise and undisguised wariness, as if wondering why there were so many people in its house. So this little bear went to fetch water, so cute. So obedient. I want one too, this is so fun. It's so funny. Its name is actually Dummy, haha, it looked a little dumb just now. The name isn't wrong. But it's so cute. The yellow bear carried the bucket of water and looked at the group of men and women in disdain. It rolled its eyes and walked in with the water. Cute? What the hell was that? Just the few of you are enough for me to swallow you whole with just a single bite. A moment later, the group saw the little bear come out with half a bucket of water and put it on the ground in a silly manner, gesturing twice. Yun Yang's voice rang out, "Everyone, you can drink some water first. It will relieve your tiredness." Everyone naturally expressed their gratitude again. Under Yun Yang's deliberate efforts, the image of an expert who had been living in seclusion for at least a few decades was thoroughly solidified. An ancient cave. Black Bear as a servant. With a single command, the overwhelming swarm of snakes immediately retreated. Even the terrifying Serpent King retreated with a single word. What kind of peerless master was this? As young Master Lan thought to himself, so did the others. Yunyang came out. He drank a mouthful of water and spat it out of the cave. The black gas that he had spat out could be vaguely seen. Suddenly, a violent panting could be heard before he spat out a mouthful of blood. His fair complexion turned ghastly white as he slowly turned around. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. This otherworldly master was actually injured? Moreover, it was a serious injury? "Senior, this is..." Young Master Lan asked politely. "It doesn't matter. I won't die for now." Yunyang sighed coldly. If it weren't for this injury, this old man wouldn't have to live in seclusion here for over 350 years. 350 years? Everyone's mouths twitched. So this expert had been here for over 350 years? How old would he really be then? "May I ask what injury Senior is suffering from?" Young Master Lan said respectfully. "This young one will never forget Senior's life-saving grace. Perhaps I can do my part in this regard." Yunyang rolled his eyes and sneered, "What a boastful claim. This old man's injury hasn't healed even after 300 years. Instead, it has depleted 70 to 80% of this old man's ability. I'm stuck in a difficult situation and can only be temporarily alleviated with a mystic art. What abilities do you, a child, have to help this old man?" Young Master Lan understood that the expert in front of him was only trying to explain that his injuries were difficult to heal, but did not directly reject his good intentions. He was delighted and said, "Senior, you may not know this, but the #1 miracle doctor in the world is my ancestor's best friend. His medical skills can be said to be the best in the world. Coincidentally, he is now loitering in Zilong City." "If Senior," Yunyang rolled his eyes and said, "the top miracle physician in this world? Other than physician genius Sundamao, who else is worthy of such a title?" Young Master Lan said with a smile, "Senior is right. This top miracle physician is the descendant of physician genius. He's also the current head of the physician genius family." Yunyang hummed in acknowledgement and turned his head abruptly. "Your family actually managed to invite the descendant of physician genius? You're even on good terms with him?" Young Master Lan said, "Senior, you may not know this but my grandfather is the Empire of Zio's current chancellor, Lan Wuxin. This Miss Z is a descendant of the Empire of Zio's royal family, a descendant of the Empire of Zio's royal family." Yunyang glanced at him faintly and said with squinted eyes, "What an impressive background. Royal family, chancellor, our identities are but nobles in the eyes of the secular world. Of course, we're not in Senior's eyes. Senior is an immortal." Young Master Lan apologized hurriedly. He obviously knew that a reclusive expert like Yunyang, especially one with such a high ability, would never take the worldly nobles seriously. Then, under the persuasion of young Master Lan, the other young masters, and the girls, Yunyang, the reclusive expert, finally agreed reluctantly to make a trip to Zilong City to invite physician genius to treat his injuries. The group cheered as if they had accomplished a great feat. Things must be made clear in advance. If it's useless, this old man will return immediately. Otherwise, I won't mistreat your kind intentions. Yunyang said coldly. Of course. Senior will always be our savior. We can't repay your kindness, but we'll gladly die for it. Young Master Lan said solemnly. A reclusive expert. An absolute miracle. Young Master Lan and the others were speechless from the shock. The reclusive expert's journey out of the forest was like a legend. First, a dozen huge black bears appeared out of nowhere, carrying a huge rock that weighed hundreds of thousands of kilograms. They used this huge rock to block the entrance of the cave. The reclusive expert stood quietly at the cave entrance for a while before sighing softly. I've been alone for 300 years, today I see the sky once more. Glory is like a dream, passing by like smoke, looking back to become an immortal again. with a wave of his sleeves, his finger brushed the ring and a flash of light flashed. A brand new green robe appeared out of thin air. The legendary interspatial equipment. Everyone's eyes widened. With a wave of the reclusive expert's hand, a mountain spring came and cascaded in the air. Facing the waterfall, he simply tidied up his appearance. He shaved off his messy beard, and a 7-colored jade hairpin appeared out of thin air. He tied his long hair into a bun, and his entire appearance changed. Although he was not very handsome, he was still full of the vicissitudes of life, but it was more eye-catching. It was as if this person was born to be the center of attention. Wherever he went, he would be worshipped by tens of thousands of people. Wearing the green robe casually, he was filled with an otherworldly elegance. Turning around, he walked out without any reluctance. Beside him, a cute little black bear followed him obediently. On his wrist, there was a small golden snake coiling around him. Chapter 399. The group left the open space of the cave. When they looked forward, everyone's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. In the dense forest, countless mystical beasts had gathered at the periphery of the cave. The sheer force of their presence was breathtaking. However, it was not because they were afraid of the numerous mystical beasts. All the mystical beasts had gathered on both sides, emptying the path in the middle. It was an obvious send-off gesture. As far as the eye could see, there were at least hundreds of thousands of mystical beasts gathered here. Among them were black bears that were hundreds of feet tall, white tigers that were 70 to 80 feet long, giant pythons that were hundreds of feet long, and, all in all, as long as there were mystical beasts here, they would be there. If there were none, it could only mean that the mystical beast's level was too low and was not qualified to come here. There were no beginner mystical beasts below the 4th level. All the mystical beasts of mid-grade and above stood there quietly. Not a single one of them made a single sound. Witnessing such an amazing scene, the group was so shocked that their hearts almost stopped beating. They carefully followed the otherworldly expert and stepped onto the path. Wherever they passed, all the beasts bowed their heads in unison, as if they were saluting and sending them off respectfully. It was as if they were respectfully sending off the Supreme King. This scene left young Master Lan and the others in utter shock. Looking at the green silhouette that was moving forward indifferently, they felt that this silhouette was so tall that it was as famous as the heaven and earth. Ah! Cloud smoky squirrels. They really are. A girl's voice cried out in surprise. Yunyang smiled faintly and waved his hand. Instantly, countless cloud smoky squirrels ran over in a pilgrimage manner and gathered on the ground, like a family gathering of cloud smoky squirrels. Yunyang's gaze swept across them and picked out a tiny cloud smoky squirrel cub. It was no bigger than a palm and it curled up warmly in his palm, looking at him with a pair of sparkling eyes. I want to find an owner for it and open up another future. Do you all agree? Yunyang's voice rang out faintly. He looked at the family of cloud smoky squirrels with warmth. The cloud smoky squirrels nodded in unison, like chicks pecking at grains. Yunyang carried the cutest, and prettiest squirrel and turned to pass it to Lady Z. He said with a smile, "The rise and fall of fate is due to cause and effect. Treat it well." Miss Z's fair and pretty face instantly flushed with joy. She nodded repeatedly and carefully took the squirrel cub, holding it in her arms and loving it so much that she couldn't bear to part with it. The eyes of the others were filled with envy. The lips of the other girls who were traveling with them moved subconsciously. It was obvious that they all wanted to bring back a Xian beast cub, but no one dared to say it. In the face of such a world-shaking supreme existence, who would dare to make any requests? Yunyang smiled and did not speak. With a wave of his hand, the large group of cloud smoky squirrels disappeared as if they had been granted amnesty. The group continued to walk on the withered grass. The number of Xian beasts standing on both sides didn't decrease in the slightest. Instead, more and more Xian beasts gathered. It was as if all the high-level Xian beasts in the entire forest had gathered here. The more the young masters and ladies watched, the more frightened they became. All of their faces turned pale. There were so many high-level Xian beasts here. How much was this? A few million? Tens of millions? Or perhaps even more? Could there be hundreds of millions of them? So many ferocious Xian beasts. Oh my God! Did we come here to hunt often? Where did these fellows hide normally? Thinking of this, everyone's thighs trembled without exception. Sigh, after I leave today, the Xian beasts in this forest will lose their restraints. I'm afraid this place will become a dangerous place. It's better not to come here again if it's not necessary. In front of them, the faint voice of the reclusive expert suddenly rang out. A series of nodding nods resembling chicks pecking at grains. Even without the expert's reminder, they had already made up their minds. They would never come to such a dangerous place in the future. It was a blessing from the heavens that they were still alive. After walking for a while, they could still see dense groups of Xian beasts sending them off. Just as young Master Lan and the rest were feeling anxious, wondering how long this mystical wall built by the Xian beasts was, the reclusive expert said faintly, "You're delaying our progress too much like this. I've received everyone's kind intentions. You may all disperse." Before his words echoed in the air, the expert waved his hand again. Boom, 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 to everyone's horror, the countless Xian beasts growled in unison after the expert had spoken. Then, like a sea of beasts, the Xian beasts suddenly dispersed. Although they had dispersed in a frenzy, they had done so in an orderly fashion. Although the entire process was inevitably messy, there was absolutely no stampede incident. Whether they flew away, jumped away, ran, crawled, burrowed into the ground, or climbed up the trees, all of them went their own ways, executing their own skills and returning on their own, not interfering with one another. It had only been a few breaths' time, but there was not a single Xian beast in sight. "I'll be back." The reclusive expert seemed a little sentimental. Witnessing this scene, everyone subconsciously regarded Yun Yang as a deity. Young Master Lan mustered his courage and said, "Senior's injury can definitely be healed. When the time comes, you can step into the mortal world again, roaming the world." Yun Yang replied faintly, "Let's hope so." The expert's words obviously meant that he did not have much hope, it was just a harmless attempt. This old man has been away from the prosperity of the world for a long time. Now that I've stepped into the mortal world again, I'm willing to go out and see the vicissitudes and changes of this world, to see how far it has come. Yun Yang sounded weary. Hope is only a sliver of hope. Young Master Lan did not know how to continue the conversation. After a momentary daze, he smiled and said, "May I ask for Senior's surname? How should we juniors address Senior? It's too distant to always use Senior's name." Young Master Lan had long planned to establish a friendship with the expert before him. Being friendly now was only an act of pushing the boat along with the current. Yun Yang said faintly, "I don't like to show myself in front of people all my life. I've always referred to myself as a wandering cloud and a wild crane. You can just call me Elder Yun." "Greetings, Elder Yun." The group bowed together in a respectful manner. However, everyone knew very well that the person before them could never really have the surname Yun. The Yun of Elder Yun was most likely the Yun of the wandering cloud and a wild crane. However, it was to be expected that the reclusive master was unwilling to reveal his real name. If they could establish a friendly relationship with him this time, they would naturally get to know each other when they got to know each other. On the other hand, if they could not establish a friendly relationship, what was the point of knowing his real name? For now, it was enough to know how to address the other. For a peerless expert like Elder Yun, it would be strange if he were to befriend a bunch of juniors like them at this time. Elder Yun. Without the mystical beasts to send them off, the group hastened their pace. Elder Yun was still in the lead while the adorable bear cub was a step ahead of him, opening the way. This seemingly ordinary little pet was actually moving at a very fast speed. However, the forest was huge. It was still a whole day later that the group arrived at the edge of the forest. It was only here that they could truly heave a long sigh of relief, completely relieved. They were out. They had finally come out safely. As for young Master Lan and the rest, when they saw the groups of mystical beast hunters entering the dense forest, their gazes were filled with mockery and pity. These pitiful creatures must not know what was in this dense forest. Not everyone was lucky enough. I wish all of you the best of luck. Yun Yang looked at these young masters and ladies coldly, only to see that each of them was overjoyed at having survived the ordeal. There was not a hint of sorrow on their faces for the 200 people who had perished in the forest. Yun Yang did not even stop when he passed by the battleground. These people did not mention anything about cleaning up the corpses, they just followed him out. A bunch of cold-hearted people, both men and women. Yun Yang commented in his heart. In front of Zilong City. On one side, there was a long queue of people waiting to enter the city, stretching for several miles. On the other side, there was a queue of similar length, but this queue was waiting to leave the city. Currently, Zilong City was on high alert. Every entry and exit of the city gate required a strict identity verification as proof. And this unprecedented and strict identity verification made everyone complain incessantly, but they had no choice but to comply. In front of the city gate, other than the executioners who were out in the open, intimidating those who were itching to make a move with their gleaming blades, there were also countless experts hidden in the dark, paying close attention to any traces, not leaving any loopholes. Under such a strict surveillance, it was only natural that people were being dragged out continuously. Sir Army, the person on this pass is really me. How can you prove that you are you? Do you think you are a pass? Take him away. It states that you, Li Dajin, weigh 130 caddies. How heavy are you? Sir Army, I have only put on a little weight these years. It's not a problem to put on weight in middle age, what kind of problem are you talking about? Take him away. Sir Army, I just have a disease, there are more hairs on my face, this is albinism, a very common skin disease. Sir Army, I really didn't fake it, I dressed up, I didn't say you dressed up, but you confessed yourself. Take him away, take him away. Behind them, many people were whispering to each other. There has never been an investigation like this before. Isn't this identity verification a little too harsh? This is not an identity verification, it is simply torturing people. Where did so many spies come from? That's right, this is really never heard of from ancient times to the present. Why did it suddenly start this year? What the hell is going on? It is said that this is a new French government decree, for the unification of the country, a good deed for the present generation and benefit the future generations. Good deed my ass. By doing this, not to mention in the long run, I'm afraid that everyone will go to jail. At present, how many people think that this decree is beneficial to the people's livelihood? It is true that people are boiling with discontent everywhere. I think the ruler wants to torture the poor to death. Even if it is a good deed for the present generation and benefit the future generations, it won't benefit us citizens, it will all benefit the officials. Yun Yang stood aside indifferently, watching the bustling crowd in front of him, his ears filled with endless complaints and curses, his face expressionless. Chapter 400. Could they not enter the city? How could the Lan clan afford to lose face like this? After all, young Master Lan had always thought of himself as the host of this otherworldly expert's invitation, especially with his lofty status and background. Yet, he actually needed something like a travel permit just to enter the city. Wasn't his reputation being trampled on to the point of no leeway? Once the popinjays exited the forest, they had sent back all the information about their condition and situation. Out of the 220 people who went out, only 17 came back. The casualties could be said to be disastrous. Hearing that their own descendants had actually experienced such a great danger, the elders of the various big families, especially the direct elders of those few young boys and girls, were all frightened, repeatedly saying that their descendants had suffered. At this moment, outside the city gate, there were already people from the various clans waiting. As the group approached, people from the noble families had already surrounded them. Among them, a few women stood out the most as they rushed out to search for their children like madmen. It was only when they saw that the children were safe that they calmed down and hugged them, bawling their eyes out. Of course, the youths did not like being treated like children by their parents usually, but after escaping death this time and seeing their families again, their emotions were different from usual. Anyone who had gone through a life-and-death situation would have a different state of mind, unusually agitated. Yunyang looked at them indifferently, a desolate look flashing across his face. It was as if he had secluded himself from the world for too long and was unfamiliar with the emotions of this world, estranged. Yunyang was indifferent to the people from the noble families who came up to him and said nice things about him. His gaze was indifferent, he was not arrogant or cold, but it was obvious that he did not think much of the so-called influential families in front of him. He did not even try to hide it. In spite of this, which one of the people sent out by the noble families to deal with external affairs was not a shrewd person? These people knew very well that they had long known from the message their young masters had sent back that this young master possessed earth-shattering power. It was normal for such an extraordinary person to be arrogant and aloof, to look up to others from a strategically advantageous position or even to be superior. Of course, the people could only be cautious and respectful as they clustered around Yunyang. The group entered the city gate in a grand manner. As for the travel pass, what was that? Yunyang looked at the officials who were checking at the city gate coldly, his face expressionless. These people didn't know that the person they needed to guard against the most had already swaggered in and kowtowed to them. The old lord is still in court, but he has already sent word that we must not neglect our esteemed guests and must receive them carefully. Just tonight, the old lord has also prepared a grand banquet to welcome our esteemed guests. The Lan family's butler bent over and leaned in front of Yunyang, trying his best to please him. As the saying goes, the prime minister's doorstep is a 7th-ranked official, and the head steward of the Lan residence can be regarded as a 5th-ranked official or above. At this moment, his attitude was lowered to the ground, and he was trying his best to flatter and flatter. He knew very well that he had to invite such an expert to his house. Everyone had experienced ups and downs in the officialdom for many years. In this era of war, who didn't know the benefits of having such a peerless expert in the family? The benefits that could not be seen or touched were even greater than the heavens. What are they doing then? Yunyang answered nonchalantly, his gaze fixed on the city gate as he asked in a curious tone. To answer our esteemed guest, this city is verifying the identity and background of those entering and exiting the city. The butler was very talkative and had long been used to reading people's expressions. The main purpose of mobilizing so many people is to capture a dangerous person. Anyone who doesn't have a travel pass with them or whose identity doesn't match the travel pass they have will be arrested and sent to the court to be dealt with. We must eliminate all dangers at the initial stage. Yunyang hummed faintly and said, I don't have these things as well. Of course, our esteemed guest isn't included in this restriction. The butler smiled obsequiously. The so-called travel pass and so on are merely proof of identity for the common folk. How would they be in our esteemed guest's eyes? Even if it's necessary, this residence will prepare them for our esteemed guest. We won't let our esteemed guest be disturbed at all. Yunyang shook his head, bored out of his mind. He lowered his eyelids and ignored the other families who had come over to curry favor with him, obviously acknowledging the position of the residents of Land's invitee. From the moment Yun Yang stepped into Zilong City was already filled with people. All the mystical beasts and animals within the boundaries of Zilong City were lying on the ground in an unusually quiet manner, not moving an inch. Even the reptiles, venomous snakes, lizards, centipedes. All of them stayed where they were, unmoving like wooden statues. They were different from humans. They could clearly feel that 2 of the 4 kings of mystical beasts had arrived at Zilong City. Furthermore, the other 2 supreme existences had come as well. Yun Yang's wrist was coiled around the small snake while the black bear cub was beside him. On top of the black bear cub's head, 2 tiny kittens were squatting obediently, curled into a ball and sleeping. The cub's gaze was filled with panic, as if he was about to wet his pants. Oh my God, the 2 on top of my head. What terrifying existences are they? Although they look like they're still underage, why do I feel such a heavy pressure? I can't even feel their specific level. How can they give me such a strong pressure? Could it be that they're much higher than me? How could such terrifying existences still have a master? They only exist as pets. Oh my God, just how strong is the master? The pinnacle of this world? Invincible in this world? The pinnacle of cultivators? Or perhaps a legend or a myth? He dared not think further, or he would be scared to death. On the other hand, Yun Yang, who had arrived at the Lan residence, immediately enjoyed a more honorable reception than the emperor. Not only was he arranged to have a separate, quiet yard, but a child with the surname Lan, with a cultivation base of the 3rd peak, was also specially arranged to serve him. The child was not even 10 years old but already had a cultivation base of the 3rd peak. His talent was imaginable. Furthermore, his surname was Lan. It was obvious that he was a descendant of the Lan family that had been carefully cultivated. His status in the Lan family might not be lower than young Master Lan himself. The Lan family had sent him here as soon as he arrived. Other than showing great sincerity, they also hoped that this child could catch the eye of expert Yun. If he could be taught a thing or 2 by such an expert, this child's future would be even more limitless. Of course, Yun Yang was well aware of this and understood it thoroughly. It was just that he would not do such a thing even if he was beaten to death. They had just met for the first time anyway, so he should just do what he was supposed to do. There was no need to be deliberate. This was more in line with his image as a reclusive expert who stood aloof from the world. That night, the Lan family held a grand banquet to welcome their distinguished guest. The Empire of Zio's chancellor, Lan Wuxia, hosted the banquet personally, allowing Yun Yang to be seated at the most honorable seat. Accompanying him were the heads of the 8 noble families. The 4 young men and 4 young ladies who went on this trip were all the direct descendants of these families. It was because of this that everyone was spoiled, especially the girl in blue, Zi Yunyan. She was the granddaughter of the Empire of Zio's Prince of Concord, Zi Yuanxiang, a legitimate descendant of the royal family. Even for this banquet, Prince of Concord, Zi Yuanxiang, had come personally. The banquet was exceptionally grand. Everyone ate and drank freely, and the atmosphere was extremely joyous. Only the honored guest seemed to be a little impatient with the current hustle and bustle. He only drank a cup of wine, and then stopped drinking. His face was as calm as water, and his expression did not change. His face was as calm as still water, without a change in expression, but anyone could see the dissatisfaction in his heart. If it wasn't for the fact that he had taken a few more bites of the dishes, everyone would have suspected that this expert was completely out of this world. Lan Wuxia said with a smile, "Senior Yun has saved the lives of these juniors. You're our family's great benefactor, but why do you seem to have an opinion on my humble home's wine?" Knowing that Yun Yang was a reclusive expert who had lived in seclusion for at least 300 years, Lan Wuxin dared not be careless even though he was the ancestor of the civil officials and had a high status. In spite of this, he would never believe it so easily. These people were all sly old foxes. No matter how suspicious they were, they still questioned him politely. Of course, Yunyang understood the crux of the matter. It was easy for him to deceive the juniors, but it was not so easy for him to get past this group of old men. Hearing Lan Wuxin's question about the banquet's wine, Yunyang shook his head at once and said faintly, "This is called wine?" The high-ranking officials and nobles were taken aback and chuckled bitterly at the same time. If it were an ordinary person who said that he had seen something great, he would most likely be accused of boasting. However, when an important figure said that he had seen something great in a formal occasion, even if he was actually boasting, those who heard would only listen respectfully. On the surface, it would look as if he really thought so and spoke reasonably. It was exactly the situation now. The banquet held at the residence of the minister and the guests were all distinguished guests. How could the wine used be ordinary? This was definitely the most expensive wine in the entire Zilong city or even the entire empire of Zio. It was the highest grade of wine, the finest wine. Before Yunyang's comment, everyone was enjoying the wine as if it was malt syrup. "You call this wine?" Yunyang asked out of the blue. No one felt that they were being insulted, or that this guy was deliberately farting. Instead, they instinctively thought that this elder Yun really thought that the wine was not good, and that was why he stopped after tasting it and didn't drink it. For a super old monster who had lived in seclusion for more than 350 years, who knew what good things he had seen before? What was more, he was an expert whose mystical cultivation base had reached the pinnacle of the world. How could such a person simply tell lies to raise his status? He would not be so clumsy as to call someone else's wine trash in front of all the nobles and nobles. He must have the best wine, the finest wine in the truest sense of the word. Sir Yun must have better wine. Lan Wuxin chuckled. With Lan Wuxin's identity, it was actually beneath his status to say so, but he had said it anyway. It was a test to see what this reclusive expert could bring out. Even if he was a reclusive expert, it would not work if he wanted to put on a show to reap benefits from the families of these old foxes. Humph, Yunyang snorted faintly. With a swipe of his ring, 2 pots of wine appeared on the table abruptly. The high-ranking officials and nobles were dumbfounded when they saw it. Seeing is believing, hearing is false. It was one thing to hear that this person had interspatial equipment, but it was another to see it with their own eyes. But space equipment alone was already a unique and dreamy item in this world. Thinking of his identity in the wine he took out, which he claimed to be a good wine, it must be extraordinary. It must be a top-notch wine. Because of this, everyone couldn't help but feel a bit more reverence in their hearts. "These wines are enough to drink a few cups," Yunyang said faintly. "I mean, what I've brought out isn't considered the best. After all, I haven't worked for hundreds of years. My hands are rusty." Upon seeing this, Prime Minister Lan did not dare to neglect. He sent someone to open the mud seal, and suddenly, a refreshing fragrance floated out. What Yunyang had brought out was all the wine in Lei Dongtian's family. These were the dozen pots of wine that he had not taken out when he had given the ring to Yunyang. The wine was nothing to Lei Dongtian, but it was a wine that could only be found in the bound of universe after all. It was a wine that the influential figures of the bound of universe's great families often drank. If it was not so, why would Lei Dongtian bring a dozen pots with him? It could be said that this wine was much better than the wine in the Tianxian continent, be it in terms of ingredients or brewing process. It was just right for Yunyang to take out to show off. After drinking a cup of wine, everyone had the same feeling: this is wine. The so-called best wine in the empire of Zio that they had just drunk was trash compared to this wine. The expert was used to drinking such excellent wine. It would be strange if he was willing to drink trash wine again. Everyone exchanged glances discreetly. The banquet continued and the crowd continued to drink. Of course, they were drinking the wine that Yun Yang had just brought out. However, their attitude towards Yun Yang was even more respectful. Not only did this elder have an astounding cultivation base, but he also had an interspatial equipment and the ability to command the mystical beasts in the world. Even the wine that he had brought out was the best in Zhou, no, the best in Tianxian. There was no wine in this world that could surpass this. It seemed that it would be a mistake not to urge him. During the banquet, one of King Jing An's guards had too much to drink and came forward to challenge Yun Yang in a drunken manner. Yun Yang exhaled lightly and the guard was sent flying hundreds of feet away, spitting blood and landing right outside the hall. The crowd was shocked. This was a seventh peak expert. How could he be blown to such a state? How could the guard have flown so far? Could it be that this was planned? It was terrifying to think about it. Chapter 401. What do you mean? After the banquet, Prince of Concord, Zi Yuanxiang, who was already drunk and spouting nonsense, looked at Lan Wuxin with clear, sharp eyes. Lan Wuxin was widely acknowledged to be resourceful. Not only was he Zio's think tank in the imperial court, he was also the leader of the officials in the small circle. There shouldn't be a problem with Elder Yun's identity. Lan Wuxin frowned and said, instead, I suspect that this person's identity isn't just very high, it might even be ridiculously high. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but his gaze is filled with disdain, as if everyone here is beneath his notice. Also, his appearance is very neat. Apart from the vicissitudes of life, everything else is unusually neat and tidy. Even his fingernails are clean. Also, the indifference of having been through the vicissitudes of life in his gaze is clear. It means that he's definitely not a young man. Furthermore, his posture is superb as well. Whether it's eating, holding a goblet, or even his speech and actions, they're all extremely elegant. Therefore, I suspect that this person's ability isn't just extremely high. He might even be from a noble family. When I was talking to him in close proximity just now, I could smell a nice scent of grass and wood lingering around him. Also, before this banquet, when we first met outside the city, this old man had already smelled the faint scent of alcohol on him. Lan Wuxin said seriously, he definitely didn't drink then. There was no taste of alcohol in his mouth, but there was always the scent of alcohol on him. Elegant and relaxed, yet arrogant. He's from a noble family, but his skills are unparalleled. He's indifferent to everything except for the wine that we've served so courteously. Moreover, he doesn't have any objection to coming to the empire of Zio. Such a person can't help but remind this old man of a legendary person. Zi Yuanxiang's eyes shone like two light bulbs as he carefully lowered his voice. Old brother, do you mean that this is, that person? Lan Wuxin kept quiet for a moment and said, if what he said about living in seclusion for over 300 years is true, then it's most likely true. Zi Yuanxiang slapped his thigh and said, my daughter once said that he had the ability to command all the profound beasts in the forest. When his group left the profound beast forest, all the mid and high-level profound beasts in the forest lined up to send them off. This king feels that without a power that has been around for decades or even centuries, it would be impossible to achieve such an effect. Lan Wuxin said in a low voice, so, this person is really that person? Zi Yuanxiang nodded and said enviously, Chancellor Lan is so lucky. Your grandson actually managed to invite this person over. This is truly a blessing from the heavens. I can only be envious. The others were confused by their conversation and asked curiously, Prime Minister Lan, Wang Ye, who are you talking about? There was no joy on Lan Wuxin's face. Instead, he looked more solemn and did not reply immediately. Zi Yuanxiang sucked in a deep breath and said, that person is, the god of wine, Feng Xianga. Yunyang sat alone in the small yard. After the banquet, Yunyang sent away the child with the surname Lan and rejected all the attendants. Lan Wuxin had already made up his mind about Yunyang's identity then, so he accepted the advice readily and issued a strict order to list the small yard as a forbidden ground. Without Yunyang's permission, no one was allowed to enter. In spite of this, there were actually quite a number of living creatures in the yard. There was Yunyang himself, a bear, a snake, 2 kittens, Whitey 2 and Whitey 3, and an unusually ugly bird that could not fly, Gigi. He had entered Zilong City after all. However, this was only the first step and he had already expended so much energy. How should he proceed from here on? Yunyang carefully sensed the traces of spiritual qi in Zilong City, but with his current cultivation base and attainment, he could not sense any spiritual qi even when he intentionally searched for the city's spiritual qi. The spiritual restraining formation had really turned the entire Zilong City into a cultivator's forbidden ground. Anyone who fought here would have their combat power reduced by at least 30%. As for those martial artists who were known for their strange cultivation methods such as spitting fire, shape-shifting, and, it was a disaster. All of them could not be used here. Boom! Yunyang abruptly kicked the door of the small yard into smithereens and hollered, "Where is he?" This sudden explosion was truly earth-shattering. Lan Wuxin and the others were discussing how to keep this god here when they heard the explosion and heard the expert who was suspected to be Feng Xianga's howl, "Why has Zilong City become a forbidden ground?" The group looked at each other, not knowing how to react. The sudden howl was filled with rage. Just as everyone was feeling doubtful and was about to respond, a long howl came again and soared straight into the 9 heavens. It was like a giant phoenix that soared into the clouds with a long howl. The group was shocked and terrified. How could they care about anything else? They rushed to the yard like a swarm of bees. Looking up towards the source of the sound, they saw a ray of rainbow light shooting into the sky like the most brilliant meteor. Looking along its trajectory, it looked like a rainbow light curtain had risen from the ground, charging until the figure could no longer be seen. However, the curtain of light was still there, as if it was tangible. Just this scene alone was already a rare sight in this world. Yet, it was created by a single person. A miracle, a miracle, a miracle. When the 3 miracles were gathered at a single point, it was the creation of a legend, the birth of a myth. The group lifted their heads, shock written all over their faces. There were no words that could describe the peculiar emotions they were feeling right now. An hour later, the rainbow light in the sky had yet to disperse. The person who stood high in the sky had yet to descend. It was as if this unparalleled expert had already left by riding the clouds. The group could not help but look at each other in shock. If it was to soar into the 9 heavens, an ace cultivator with considerable attainment could probably do it. However, to stay in the sky for more than an hour, perhaps the Empire of Zio had such a cultivation base, but none of the people present had ever seen it. In Zilong City. From the window of an inn. A few men dressed in blue looked up at the sky, bewildered. Since when did such an unparalleled expert come to Zilong City? Why is he so high profile? I've never heard of him. It's said that Lan Wuxin's grandson was saved by an otherworldly expert after encountering danger in the misty forest. The commotion seems to originate from the residents of Lan. It's most likely the work of that expert. Judging by the commotion alone, otherworldly expert doesn't seem to be enough to describe his true capability. This capability is a little too high. It's frightening indeed. Do you think this has anything to do with Yutong's 9 Supremes? I don't think so. Although the 9 Supremes each have their own abilities and are exceptionally powerful, their actual cultivation base isn't that high. How can they be related to such an expert? Judging from this person's capability, not to mention the 9 Supremes, even Yutong's pinnacle experts wouldn't be able to match this person's capability. don't be so sure. The truth has never been so absolute. To be safe, we'll pay a visit to Lan Wuxin's residence tomorrow. Only by seeing this can we be at ease. Alright, it's decided then. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the expert finally landed, but his landing spot was in Lan Wuxin's yard. Elder Yun is indeed skilled and has an astounding cultivation base. This old man almost thought that Elder Yun had left with the wind just now. It's lonely at the top. Chancellor Lan was humorous, even cracking a harmless joke. Yunyang frowned and said faintly, "Why has Zilong City become like this now? A land without the nourishment of spiritual qi, isn't it a wasteland? What's there to look forward to in a nation's capital like this?" Prime Minister Lan stammered, "Elder Yun, what are you?" Yunyang said, "This old man has only stayed here for half a day and I can already feel my condition deteriorating. I can't even carry out the most basic spiritual qi of heaven and earth, let alone cultivate. This old man can't stay in such a wasteland. I'll leave immediately tomorrow morning and bid farewell to Chancellor Lan. Sorry for the disturbance, we'll meet again if we're fated to." Lan Wuxin was extremely anxious when he heard that. He did not expect this expert to leave so soon after arriving. Looking at the other party's resolute attitude, it was obvious how determined this Elder Yun was to leave. Lan Wuxin quickly urged him to stay. "Elder Yun, don't be impatient. I've written a letter earlier, inviting brother Sun Chengfeng to come from outside the city early tomorrow morning to treat Elder Yun. Elder Yun must stay for a few more days." Yunyang snorted and did not speak, but he did not insist on leaving the next day either. Physician Sun was originally staying in the residence, but he's been restless these days and has decided to practice among the people. I've only received the news yesterday and found his whereabouts. Physician Sun is already on his way back now. I believe he'll be here soon to treat Elder Yun. Lan Wuxin said. Fine. Yunyang said gloomily, but why did this city fall into such a wasteland? What's the reason? Hasn't Chancellor Lan heard that a gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall? Lan Wuxin hesitated and said, this is indeed a last resort. There's a reason behind it. Yunyang asked, what reason could it be? Turning an empire's capital into a wasteland of spiritual qi. You must know that severing the spiritual qi means severing the cultivation path of millions of martial artists. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth may seem like rootless duckweed that can be found everywhere, but there's a limit to how much of it there is. A wasteland of spiritual qi constructed by a formation looks like an empty pavilion. Once the formation is removed, the spiritual qi will return, but in reality, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth can't be controlled by humans. Actively rejecting the spiritual qi of heaven and earth will cause the spiritual qi to become chaotic and unbalanced. There might even be a permanent state of spiritual qi vacuum. This place will then become a martial artist's desert. Think about it, if an empire's capital is a wasteland of spiritual qi, the empire's power, the people's strength, and the martial force's future can be imagined. The empire of Zio will eventually become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered by the continent's heroes. By then, the people will be plunged into misery and suffering, and the country will fall apart. Even if there's a great reason, it can't cover up the heaps of sin. The words of a certain expert were spoken with great certainty. He was worried about the country and the people, and he was filled with deep hatred and resentment. Lan Wuxin had no more doubts about the identity of the person before him. Chapter 402. You may not know about this, Elder Yun. The current situation is just a stopgap measure. The so-called land of dead spirits also has follow-up measures. If Elder Yun is free, I would like to have a chat with Elder Yun to resolve this doubt. As he spoke, Lan Wuxin exchanged glances with Zi Yuanxiang and said, everyone, please stand down. Tonight, I will drink with Elder Yun and have a long talk. Everyone agreed and left. In Yunyang's yard, Lan Wuxin ordered a few dishes and began to talk about the current situation. Elder Yun has been in seclusion for a long time. I suppose you don't know much about the current state of the continent, do you? Lan Wuxin asked. This old man has been away from the world of mortals for a long time. It is true that I do not understand the current state of affairs in the continent. Yunyang sighed bleakly. The world of mortals has long had nothing to do with this old man. However, from what I can see, Elder Yun still cares about his homeland. His words earlier were directed at Zio's destiny and people's welfare. Regardless of the passage of time and the vicissitudes of life, his heart was still unwavering. I'm ashamed of the heart of an elder, Lan Wuxin said. Yunyang kept quiet for a moment and said bitterly, you think too much. This old man is someone who has transcended the mortal world. I don't wish to be tainted by it anymore. No matter what happens to the empire of Zio, it has nothing to do with me anymore. Lan Wuxin chuckled. At this point, he no longer had any doubts about the identity of the person before him. There is indeed a reason why our city has turned into a spirit-severing world. There is also a way to deal with this spirit-severing state. Once this matter is over, there will be a way to restore the spirit qi to normal. Everything is for the future of the nation, Lan Wuxin said in a low voice. I'd like to hear the details, Yunyang said calmly. Lan Wuxin sighed and said, Elder Yun has only recently returned to the secular world. I believe Elder Yun still doesn't know about Yutong's 9 Supremes? The name of Yutong's 9 Supremes? Yunyang frowned and lifted his head to look into Lan Wuxin's eyes. What Yutong's 9 Supremes? Lan Wuxin could not help sighing when he saw the bafflement in the man's eyes. Those are 9 demons. Devil? Yunyang was taken aback. At this moment, Yunyang was not acting at all. It was Yunyang's first time hearing from someone else that Yutong's 9 Supremes were demons. After all, in the eyes of Yutong's people, the 9 Supremes were legends of the world. In the eyes of Yutong's higher-ups, the 9 Supremes were righteous men who had saved the nation and lives. Even in the eyes of most enemies, Yutong's 9 Supremes were heroes. In the eyes of the 9 Supremes' brothers themselves, the 9 Supremes were chivalrous, courageous, upright, chivalrous, and courageous men. Each and every one of them was. As for the comment that the 9 Supremes were demons, it was unheard of. So, I'm a devil in the hearts of the people of other countries? Yunyang had a strange feeling in his heart. Being in the enemy's country and listening to the enemy's evaluation of oneself, this feeling was really indescribable. Lan Wuxin heaved a long sigh and said, the past of Yutong's 9 Supremes is the real long story. Then, Lan Wuxin recounted the descent of the residents of 9 Supremes, the 9 Heavens domain, the appearance of the 9 Supremes, and how they were slowly tortured by the 9 Supremes in the battlefields of various countries. Ever since Yutong had the 9 Supremes, the Empire of Zio has been at war for years without a single victory. I still remember the time when the 4 countries surrounded Yutong, millions of troops attacking Yutong at the same time, intending to use Yutong's military strength to finish the battle in one fell swoop. However, the 9 Supremes appeared, stirring up a storm, splitting the earth and collapsing the sky. The tables were turned in an instant. A battle that was meant to be a sure victory was swallowed by defeat. All these years, the Empire of Yutong was located in the center of the continent and was often attacked by other countries. It was not easy, but the losses suffered by the 4 empires from the war were also devastating. In just 5 short years, the number of men who died on the battlefield in Zio alone had already exceeded 10 million. Lan Wuxin's eyes were brimming with tears. More than 10 million Zio men were buried in the battlefield just when victory was within their grasp. Until 2 years ago, when the 9 Supremes were suddenly ambushed by a strong enemy and were completely annihilated. The 4 empires heaved a sigh of relief and began to recuperate, preparing to take down Yutong in one go after they had recovered their strength and start their conquest for 10,000 years. Who would have thought that the 9 Supremes weren't really wiped out in that battle? There's still one left. Yunyang asked in a low voice, how can there be an unbroken egg when the nest is overturned? The 9 peaks of the mountain actually fell short at the last moment. Do you know which Supreme is the one who survived? Lan Wuxin snorted coldly and said, based on the official news and the elemental skills displayed by that person, everyone thinks that the surviving Supreme Wind is Supreme Wind. However, in our eyes, if it's really Supreme Wind back then, I'm afraid he doesn't have such an ability. Yunyang was struck by a thought and said, oh. What do you mean? Haven't you been saying that the 9 Supremes are all capable men? Why are you belittling yourself now? Lan Wuxin said, Elder Yun still doesn't know that we've analyzed each of the 9 Supremes' actions, tactics, and every battle they participated in detail. According to Supreme Wind's information, he possessed the ability to decide the outcome of the war, but he didn't have such a comprehensive view of the overall situation as he is now. His personality was slightly extreme, and his temperament was slightly inferior as well. Such a person would definitely not be able to achieve everything that the current Venerable One has done. Based on this doubt, we've come to a conclusion after further analysis. Although this surviving Supreme has been displaying his ability using Supreme Wind's tactics, the true intention of doing so is to deceive others. In other words, he's definitely not Supreme Wind himself. Since this person has reappeared, he's been meticulously uncovering the spies hidden in Yutong's empire. He's been destroying the 4 Seasons Tower's 100-year plan bit by bit, and he's even manipulating the continent's situation step by step. Unknowingly, he's stirring up the world and manipulating Tianquan's power. Up until this day, no one has seen this person's true face. No one knows where he usually appears, where he disappears, and where he goes. Each time, he appears and disappears like a shadow. Such schemes, tactics, and tactics can only be done by the most intelligent of men. Only by weighing everything, preparing for a rainy day in advance, setting up an extremely strict route, and taking all unexpected factors into consideration, can it be done. This requires an unimaginably large calculation and an extremely meticulous mind. According to our understanding of Supreme Wind doesn't have such intelligence, nor is he a wise man. As for the other venerable lords, each of them has their own victories, but none of them can be as comprehensive as this. Therefore, we're certain that the remaining 9 Supremes must be the 9 Supremes' brains, Supreme Cloud. Yunyang frowned and said faintly, is this the empire of Zio's suspicion? Or is it the suspicion of all the countries in the continent? Lan Wuxin said, the higher authorities of our country have only confirmed this after many discussions. This matter is also secretly acknowledged by the higher authorities of various countries. Even the few people in Yutong's higher authorities, although they've said on the surface that the person who has appeared is Supreme Wind, I'm sure they've long known the truth. The remaining one of the 9 Supremes must be Supreme Cloud. Only a wise man like Supreme Cloud, who is resourceful and calculative, could possibly escape from a death trap. Only Supreme Cloud could have such a meticulous mind. Only Supreme Cloud has the ability to manipulate the world's power and stir up Tianquan's power without showing himself. Lan Wuxin spoke with certainty. Yunyang nodded inwardly and said, if that's the case, the real purpose of turning the city into such a state is to deal with Supreme Cloud? Lan Wuxin was very impressed with the man's ability to deduce many things from one instance. He said with a smile, Elder Yun is indeed experienced with age. You've hit the nail on the head. Yunyang replied, what's so hard about guessing? If there's someone else targeted, what you've said to me would be meaningless. However, what does sealing off Zilong City have to do with dealing with Supreme Cloud? Are you all so sure that Supreme Cloud will come to Zilong City? You can even lock the time to be near? Lan Wuxin said, under normal circumstances, Supreme Cloud would never come here. Even if he did, he wouldn't be impulsive when faced with such a huge trap that specifically targets his cultivation method. However, if there's a special situation and he has to come, that's another matter altogether. Yunyang frowned. Special situation? What special situation? Lan Wuxin kept quiet for a bit and said, one of Supreme Cloud's elders has fallen into our hands. Yunyang smiled faintly. Good move. Lan Wuxin flushed. I won't deny this. We're indeed despicable and unscrupulous in our actions, but Supreme Cloud's elder isn't a kind soul either. This person has assassinated the higher authorities of the four empires multiple times and has taken at least thousands of lives. Since we've captured him alive, we should make good use of him and end the Nine Supremes' legacy with his life. Chapter 403. Yunyang said faintly, I didn't mean to mock you for being despicable when I said that it was a good tactic. When two countries are at war, for the sake of world domination and the welfare of the people, one should resort to any means necessary. However, how could you be sure that this assassin? Is he related to Supreme Cloud? Lan Wuxin said, we didn't know about this at first. After we captured the assassin, we interrogated him about his background and whether there was another mastermind behind the scenes. Who knew that the old man would rather die than speak? No matter how much we tortured him and used all the interrogation methods, we still got nothing. Helpless, we activated the art of soul-searching and found out that the assassin was actually the father of Supreme Blood, one of the Nine Supremes. Art of soul-searching. Yunyang's voice was slow, dragging out his tone. Yunyang could only feel waves of pain in his heart. The art of soul-searching, old Dugu. What kind of torment must he have gone through? Yes, it was the art of soul-searching. Lan Wuxin said, only this kind of mystical art that directly communicates with the target's spiritual sense can forcefully break through the mental defenses of such a determined and uncompromising person. In the end, we only barely managed to get some information. Barely managed to get some information? Yunyang frowned. According to this old man's understanding of the art of soul-searching, as long as it works, the target can only reveal everything he knows. There shouldn't be anything left out. Why is there still the word, barely, when it comes to you? Is the caster not proficient enough in this method? Lan Wuxin sighed and said, the one who cast the spell was extremely skilled. According to him, the situation should not have happened. However, during the soul-searching process, for some reason, the assassin's deific consciousness resisted in the most extreme way. In the end, the assassin actually destroyed his dantian, using the most extreme and desperate method to devour the deific consciousness forcefully. The caster saw the opportunity very early and quickly withdrew, but he still lost the divine sense that entered his mind. The assassin's action may have completely annihilated the caster's invading divine sense, but it also messed up his own divine sense. Now he has fallen into a state of unconsciousness, like a dead man. After that, the great soul-searching technique would no longer have any effect. The great soul-searching technique probably requires divine sense as a medium. Now that the assassin's divine sense is gone, he naturally can't gather any information. Yunyang's expression changed drastically. There's such a thing? A terrifying aura flashed across his body. No matter how transcendent Yunyang's temperament was, he could not calm himself down when he heard such a grievous news. It was already a result of Yunyang's restraint that he did not attack Lan Wuxin and use him as a hostage in exchange for old Dugu. Just like what Lan Wuxin had said, the great soul-searching technique was a unique way to obtain the target's knowledge through the divine sense connection. However, when the technique was executed, it was extremely domineering and would cause great harm to the target's body. Furthermore, to be interrupted by one's own self in the process of searching the soul like old Dugu had done was even harder than ascending to the heavens. One must have a strong will, a profound cultivation base, a strong spirit, and most importantly, the will to face death with equanimity. One could not complete the task without any one of the above 4 requirements. Even if the task was completed, the person involved was still destined to suffer misfortune because it was a huge injury that could never be healed. The primordial spirit was exhausted, the deific consciousness was destroyed, the soul was incomplete, and the cultivation base was destroyed. How could such an injury be healed? Lan Wuxin looked at Yun Yang in slight confusion. Yun Yang had not been offended by his self-admitted despicable act just now and had even comforted him. Why was he lamenting the assassin's fate now? It should not be. The person before him was someone who had transcended the mortal world and had long forgotten about worldly affairs. He would never care about the life and death of someone from another country. That means he doesn't like the soul-searching technique. Come to think of it, all cultivators and even mortals have their own secrets, and they don't want anyone else to know about them. The soul-searching technique is built to deal with this. It seems that Elder Yun is also a person with a big secret. Yun Yang forcefully suppressed the murderous intent within him and said coldly, although it's common for 2 countries to go to any lengths in a war, such a good man of steel really shouldn't be tortured like this. Lan Wuxin, who had been imagining things but realized that Yun Yang's thoughts were completely different from his own, said with an apologetic smile, "This can't be helped. If I didn't go to such extremes, how could I have obtained such important information?" A sliver of disdain flashed across his heart as he thought, martial artists are martial artists indeed. No matter how nice their words are, they're just words. Not to mention the fact that both sides are enemies with differing standpoints, it's only right to say that they're unscrupulous to achieve their goals. These martial artists are particular about appreciating each other, recognizing heroes and valuing heroes. A man of steel shouldn't be tortured, should he be released for nothing? That's preposterous. Still, you're right about one thing. If Supreme Cloud isn't punished, he'll always be Zio's greatest threat and must be eliminated. It's just that such a method is a little too cruel. It's a pity for such a good man of steel. Yun Yang sighed emotionally. Elder Yun is right. We feel extremely sorry for the assassin as well. However, he sees us as his mortal enemy, there's really no way to turn things around. Lan Wuxin said. That's why you've used the information you've obtained to set up a trap with the intention of luring Supreme Cloud here. Ambush and kill him in one fell swoop. There's such a formation that controls the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Is its main purpose to balance Supreme Cloud's magical power? Yun Yang frowned and said, "It's a good idea, but aren't you taking it for granted? How can you be so sure that he'll come?" Lan Wuxin said, "We've set this up, of course, we've considered the consequences. We've done it too clearly. Supreme Cloud really won't come if we release the news directly. However, we've used an extremely secretive method to spread the news." Lan Wuxin smiled and said, "The 9 Supremes are brothers of the same breath and branch. Our relationship is even closer than that of flesh and blood. Supreme Cloud is a true gentleman who values relationships. Hearing that his deceased brother's father has been captured and is on the brink of death, I believe that he'll come to save him no matter what." Yun Yang asked in confusion, "Secretive method? What kind of secretive method? Everything may be predestined. When we first searched this person's soul, we accidentally discovered that he was related to Jun Moyen and that he held Jun Moyen's last medallion of gratitude. Therefore, this old man suggested using this method as an opportunity to release the news. Even if an ordinary person hears this, they won't know the gist of it, but Supreme Cloud must be well aware of it. In this case, he'll definitely come. What's more, even if Supreme Cloud comes, he'll only come alone. What's more, even if he dies in the empire of Zio, no one else will know that the person who died here is actually Yutong's last hope, Lord Supreme Cloud. Lan Wuxin said, speaking of which, this has been brewing for a long time. We've even purposely given Yutong's people a reason to come. We want to destroy the remains of General Shengguan Wudi in the Shengguan family of generals, burn them into ashes and abandon them in the wilderness. Now, the Shengguan family of generals is here. They're on their way now. They're less than 1,000 miles away from Zilong City. There's quite a number of them. According to our intel, we can basically confirm that if Supreme Cloud comes, he'll definitely be among the Shengguan family of generals. Lan Wuxin wore a menacing smile on his face as he said, by then, we only need to eliminate all of the Shengguan family of generals' men in the city. Then, we'll be rid of all future troubles. Yunyang nodded faintly. I see. It's an ingenious idea indeed, a scheming scheme. Lan Wuxin said, it's because this matter involves too much and there are too many troubles in the future that the entire Zilong City has been turned into this state. As long as Supreme Cloud can be eliminated, everything will be worth it. Yunyang said faintly, Chancellor Lan's scheming scheme is profound. This old man would like to express my admiration, but this plan is a little presumptuous. There are too many loopholes. I didn't want to say it, but there are so many of you. Don't you see where the loopholes are? Lan Wuxin's expression changed as he said respectfully, please advise, Elder Yun. Yunyang said leisurely, this old man has only just heard of this plan and I already feel that there are a few loopholes. If any one of them comes true, this trap will be broken instantly. There'll be a backlash as well. First of all, how can you guarantee that Supreme Cloud will come and follow the Shengguan family of generals team this time? If he doesn't come with the Shengguan family of generals team, then the plan won't work. Even if you kill all of the Shengguan family of generals, it'll create the illusion that Supreme Cloud is dead. Is such an outcome a good one? What's more, if Supreme Cloud isn't dead and hides in the dark, the Empire of Zio will be in real danger. Secondly, since this assassin is related to Jun Moyan and even possesses the only remaining medallion of gratitude in this world, this person must not die, especially not in the Empire of Zio or even in the hands of Zio's men. I know Jun Moyan's character all too well. How would he allow you to harm his old friend or even his benefactor? Once Jun Moyan goes berserk, it won't be easy for Zio either. Thirdly, you've said it yourself. Supreme Cloud is a wise man, always planning before taking action. Even if he came alone out of urgency this time, how could he not see that Zilong City has already become a trap? After noticing the trap, how could he not know that it's targeted at him? There's no need to do this to others, is there? So, even if he doesn't change his intention to rescue them, why wouldn't he think of a more secure way to hide? Fourthly, this is actually what worries me the most. This spiritual restraining formation covers the entire Zilong City. Its range is unprecedented. From what I know, setting up such a powerful and unique formation would require a huge amount of effort. I'm afraid it's not something that Zio can complete alone. Then, the people, forces, and organizations that help you complete this formation won't be easy to deal with either. They've helped you to remove the biggest threat, but in return, you'll have to pay a corresponding price, won't you? If it can't be removed, what will happen if it's a waste of manpower and resources and everything goes to waste? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.